Welcome to MagusintheMedia. Today's conversation is exactly what we need in these strange times. Dr. Heather Lynn is a historian, educator, and renegade archaeologist whose work focuses on the mechanisms by which human history is recorded, forgotten, and rediscovered. She holds a doctorate in education, has worked with museum institutions, and is the author of multiple books, including Evil Archaeology, Baphomet, and Anunnaki Revelation. Heather's research is interdisciplinary, blending archaeology, informed technology, and comparative religion to explore how symbolic systems from ancient Sumerian cuneiform to modern technologies like AI shape our understanding of reality. We start with the Anunnaki, Enlil, Enki, and Sumer. We get into the Sumerian problem, how civilization seems to show up almost all at once, fully restructured, and why the Sumerian language doesn't really connect to anything around it. We talk about the difference between Anunnaki and the Apkallu, what the texts actually say, migration after cataclysm, the younger Dryas, and whether myth is carrying memory from something far older that didn't survive intact or told to the uninitiated. And then we go further. Ultra-Terrestrials, altered states, Entheogens, the weird consistencies of certain visionary experiences across cultures. We get into ritual, chaos magic, priest classes, and the emergence of the techno-oligarchical parasitic class, groups that understood language, symbol, and hierarchy well enough to structure entire civilizations around them. And somewhere in there, the conversation stops being about ancient Mesopotamia and starts being about now, today. About narratives, about power, about whether we're participating in reality or constantly outsourcing that participation to systems that benefit from our amnesia. If you care about ancient civilizations, magic, consciousness, and the deeper currents shaping our world, this conversation is definitely for you. And remember, this is MagusintheMedia, where we explore myth, magic, and meaning in the stories that we love. And if that matters to you, subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who's ready to think a little more carefully about the stories that we've inherited. Now let's begin. Back to MagusintheMedia, and today we have a wonderful guest that has come oh so far away from the land beyond the land. We have Dr. Heather Lynn. She is brilliant. She's got her degrees in contemporary religions. She is a mythologist, I would state. She's a historian. She is an archaeologist, the rebel archaeologist, but she is trying to bring reality back to reality. And I've listened to her. She's an author. She's got a bunch of amazing books out there about Baphomet. She's got the new book, Anunnaki Revelations, which I think everybody should go out there and read. She's got her doctorate in education. She's a historian. She's a museum person. She's got all the things. So please, I'd like to welcome Dr. Heather Lynn to MagusintheMedia. Hello.
Hello. I don't know if I can follow that. That sounds too good for what I'm actually doing here, which is just trying to learn about the world around us and tell everybody what I'm learning as I go.
Yeah, definitely. No, that intro isn't even exactly everything that I think I could label for you, because you've written far too many books than what I've just stated. What was your first adventure into the Anunnaki? What was that first book that you wrote called?
Depends on how you classify book. So I had one that was a book, but it was more like a 99-cent Kindle kind of thing. And that was actually notable, though, because it was called the Sumerian Controversy. And it was my first sort of introduction into this world, if you will. And that one kind of led into bigger questions, because the first one, again, small report, I kind of just put it out because I was stunned at some of the things that I discovered about this excavation that had been going on at Ur. And it was the first one of its kind since the wars. And I thought, wow, this is really great. Came across a press release about it. So thought that it shouldn't be, too secretive. I didn't think there was any conspiracy. So I reached out to the professor who is in charge of that excavation, and I asked for an interview, and they said, sure. I was really excited about that. And so I had a kind of popular or growing blog at the time, and I was on Facebook. And so I put it out to everybody. Hey, I got this, great interview coming up. And are there any questions that you have for the professor? And some of them, of course, as you might imagine, were about the Anunnaki. and stargates and looting of museums and all of this. And I'm like, all right, cool. Well, I put a couple of those questions in, and I was ghosted at that point. And I thought, oh, okay, you don't want to answer those questions. I get it. So I tried to reach back out, and they just completely wouldn't talk to me after they had been very cordial before. So then I was really, really curious because I thought, oh, there's something here, And so I started doing what most people I think would do, which is follow the money. And then I unveiled a whole world of secrets and lies and corruption and things that I felt were completely unethical. So that was when I discovered that these particular excavations were being funded by big oil, of all things, and then a few notable families. One of them was Baron von Thyssen of the Thyssen family dynasty, and he was notable because, well, his family was the head funding of the Nazi war machine, but also he owned and was just a collector of antiquities, especially Mesopotamian antiquities. And he had what was at the time believed to be the second largest collection of these things, aside from Queen Elizabeth II. So I felt a little conflict of interest. And I noted it was like, okay. And it was very not as transparent as I would have liked. And I saw that they were giving field updates to the people at the oil company. And I thought, well, why is this? And so more and more people started saying, well, Heather, it's because there's stargates and demons and aliens. And I'm like, right. And so I just kept pushing through, and I was looking into these topics. And then I started getting a little more interested in, I guess, some of those alternative theories, because of course you have the people like Zechariah Sitchin or Eric von Daniken and these types, and of what would be called, I suppose, ancient astronaut theorists, as the Ancient Aliens television show likes to call them. And so I thought, okay, well, let's take a look at these authors. And I was familiar with them from just the zeitgeist or being an avid listener of like Art Bell back in the day.
Yeah.
But I didn't really do a deep dive after, maybe doing it from a more scholarly perspective, if you could do that, so I tried to take a serious look at it. And then I started to see, wow, I'm getting these weird emails from people. I was starting to get like a lot of people contacting me who are, I was surprised that they were so invested in this question of the Anunnaki in particular. And that, of course, led me to be even more curious. Like, why would this, person with lots of money and power and influence be contacting me, asking about Enlil and Enki and all of this? And I thought, well, there's something here, isn't there? And so I just went on this journey, and I thought, well, I'll log the journey. And I wrote the Anunnaki Connection. And that's where I sort of laid out an exploratory look. It's sort of a guide, first timers maybe guide to the Anunnaki from the perspective of somebody who's just trying to figure it all out. So I go over a bunch of different theories, and then I end up actually towards the end, of course, ended up having more questions and answers. And that I guess I got hooked on it then, because I found that there was something so much deeper than what now it's the mainstream. I hate to say it, but that so-called alternative media has become like the mainstream in a lot of ways, because more and more people really know about the Anunnaki and talk about it. But unfortunately, they've just accepted this one narrative for the most part, that they were these, ancient gods that were coming to Earth in like 1960s nuts and bolts spaceships and coming to mine gold because of their home planet, and it needed it for the atmosphere, and their home planet was this place called Nibiru, and it's coming back and it's going to destroy us all. And that's great, but so many people just are like, oh, that's easy, I'll just take that, just like they do a lot of things, these prepackaged ideas. And I wanted to push back on that a little bit, and that led me to having to do a whole nother book that took a lot longer than the first, because the first is an overview. And the second, this next one, the Anunnaki Revelation, is where I guess sort of reveal what I believe is actually the connections and the truth, so-called, about the Anunnaki, as much as one could. Because I try to caution people about anybody who says, I know what these things are, then they're probably lying or have something to sell. Well, I guess I have something to sell. I'm selling a book, but I'm not lying.
Value. You're selling value.
I'm trying to, like, just say, okay, here's what I'm thinking, here's where I'm at with this. And it could change because that's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to explore as I go and figure this all out, and wanting to do it from a perspective that, I'm hesitant to say skeptical because that sounds very dismissive. But instead of skeptical, just maybe treating it like it would be an academic subject, treating it with a seriousness that I think it could deserve, and then seeing what happens. I mean, we may throw out some ideas, but we may gain new perspective on others. And that's where myth plays a big part, I think.
Yes. Myth is a huge part in this. And I think it's really important that that's kind of where we start out, especially with why I resonate with this topic so much, is because we should probably start out first, for those who don't quite understand. The Anunnaki first stem from the Mesopotamian myths of Enki and Enlil. Is that correct?
Yes, and there's a sort of pantheon of these gods, 12 of them. There's actually far more, but there's hierarchies of them. And yeah, these are the gods of Sumer, and Sumer is the oldest civilization. And I say that's with an asterisk, of course, because it's the academic consideration of what a civilization is. And so it doesn't mean the first peoples. It doesn't mean that the people before that didn't have art or any sort of culture. It's just that this particular group of people invented writing as we know it. Therefore, they invented history as we know it now.
Right.
With all of the different discoveries that are being made all the time, especially Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, and all of these places, it could just be a matter of time before we find that record is pushed back even further. So for now, we say that all the history begins at Sumer, which is Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq.
Right. And then from there, we get the ideas of the Anunnaki. As you said, if people were to go, say, to ancient aliens and to the mainstream New Agey spiritual cults and different things like that, they're trying to spread the word that the Anunnaki are coming from, as you said, from the stars, from this 10th planet, and they've come down and they'd seeded our planet. Is that kind of the New Agey woo-woo version of that?
I would say so. Yeah. That's a new age version, also kind of the ancient astronaut theorist version too.
Yeah. But what we're trying to do, whereas in something I've thought about for a long time, and you've stumbled across it in your brilliant work, is that you're trying to actually redefine exactly what the Anunnaki are, and that mythology now isn't just this thing that is a folklore or a story passed through time that's trying to, yes, give us ideas of how to live our life, but maybe there's something a little more to our mythology than just mere story. Is that kind of what you're leading into?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
yes, for sure. Because when people say something is myth, so you have basically roughly two camps. You have the people who are these scientific materialists who think, these are entities from another planet that came in spaceships. With that, you have some of the new age people who also think there's a spiritual element to it, but it's still really linked to that materialist perspective. And then you have the people who are, well, of course, you have the complete skeptics who say there's nothing there. And they kind of fall along into the same, like maybe a Venn diagram of those who say, well, it's just myth. But that's where, I say myth, you can't just say it's just myth, because what is myth? It's very dismissive to also say something is myth because it implies that it's a lie. And I would argue myth is the ultimate truth. So there's facts and then there's truth. And I know it gets a little postmodern-y sounding, but you have something that's factual, perceivable, observable, measurable, and scientific. And then you have myth, which transcends all of those things, and it's literally, in my view, magic. When you look at the definition of magic being, say, action from a distance, you have something like myth being the purest magic and the purest truth. Because just imagine what it is to pick up a book that was written by somebody hundreds of years ago, and you're reading that book and you're moved to tears, right? That person who wrote that has long since been dead. They may have written in a different language that was later translated. It may have been just completely so far away from us in every sense of the word. So myth and this sort of thing can transcend space and time, and it can allow the myth maker or the person who made the art to move you to do something or feel a certain way based on their will. So they're enacting their will across space and time. It's literally magical. And so when people say, well, these are just mythical gods, they're just kind of constructs, it's like, Yes, but that's why we need to look more deeply and seriously at these, because it could represent an important phenomenology of the
Yeah.
human experience that we could just be throwing out because it's just not fitting our sort of scientific view of things, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then would you state that then we can make a one-to-one connection that like Enki and Enlil, these big major characters in the Mesopotamian or Sumerian myths, those characters are the Anunnaki?
Yes, they would be part of the Anunnaki, and what I noticed too in kind of looking into this a little further, there is another entity that comes out of this that are known as the Apkallu. And when you just simply Google like Anunnaki, you'll see these figures come up in art and this motif over and over again of, say, a bird like human, a bird headed person, maybe a winged, kind of like a genie or an angel or something like that. And they were also known as genies. So it's not too far away from that idea. But what you have is this distinction between this type of chimeric entity and the Anunnaki. And so a lot of times that gets lost in, no pun intended, but lost in translation as well,
Yeah.
because people are just like, oh, they're all Anunnaki. And it's like, no, there's differences, and they're important differences because they're described very differently and they have different functions. And it adds a depth and richness to our understanding of what the people in the past actually thought or believed.
Yeah. So then, from your understanding from the contemporary religious version of you, in comparison to the archaeological version of you, now, how did the Sumerians or the Babylonians, or how did they envision these Anunnaki? Were they gods to them, or did they view them as like real people?
They viewed
Do
them
you-
as very real gods, and that's
yeah.
that's where it's kind of, it was very real. They had a very real impact on their lives, and that's part of the intrigue, really, because you can look at that and say, well, they were very superstitious then. They really believe this, hook, line, and sinker. That's it. But then you have to question, were they that not human? I mean, we're dehumanizing people from the past, and they're Homo sapiens sapiens, just like us. And so,
Right.
what was really going on there? So, I try to look at the Sumerians and the ancient people as actual thinking, reasonable people. And it's our responsibility then, looking back at their text, to give them that benefit of the doubt and then try to interpret it in a way that would make sense and fit within that, as opposed to saying, well, they were just superstitious back then. They believed in all these gods. So they believed in these gods, but they really described the Anunnaki as being very physical. They were not moral representations of like what we would think now in a modern era would be gods. So they weren't, I always say the line, like, you wouldn't wear a bracelet that says what would Zeus do, and you
Yeah,
wouldn't
I
wear
saw
a
that.
bracelet that says like what would Enki do. You wouldn't do this, because these gods didn't represent a moral code. Just like the Greek gods, they were just kind of, getting drunk, and they were kind of raping each other and doing all kinds of
Yeah.
like crimes, like total Epstein level stuff. So like,
Right.
why would
Yeah.
we be looking at them like they're gods? And that it's because our view of what God is now is just very different from what it was in antiquity or the far ancient past. And so understanding that to them, these were gods, these were governors, so to speak, and lords of their land, lords of their hearts, lords of their minds. They were just ever present. And so looking at it that way and accepting that they thought they were real, and that there does seem to be a lot of literature describing their eating habits and preferences and
Mhm.
very human things.
Mm.
I looked at it and thought, well, what are these? And then juxtaposed to the Apkallu, who are described as being semi-biological entities.
Mm.
So there was a need to somehow say these are different, and they were actually connected to the Pleiadian star system. So they were completely different. Yeah, and so you have these kind of coexisting. And so with that being said, I looked into it a little further and tried to just assume that the Sumerians were telling the truth. Just look at the text and say, this is all
Right.
real. We don't
Yeah.
need, like spacecraft. We don't need these things. Oh, could it be? Maybe, fine. But we don't need it. Let's go with the bare bones.
Yeah.
Human behavior, what's going on. So when you look at the text that way, For me, what emerged was a story of a clash of meetings of people after a cataclysm and after a migration. So survivors of a great flood, the great flood,
Yep.
but linked not necessarily to one Bible, but linked to the Younger Dryas impact event, and massive climate change and melting happened and displacing people. And they had to disperse and go through and, seek different lands. And I think that based on the archaeological evidence, based on the textual evidence, based on the content of what they were actually saying, what they describe was the meeting of entities, individuals, humans who were much taller. They were described as the shining ones, meaning perhaps they were already mastering metallurgy, which, if you like, when you think about Atlantis, if you're, into Plato, you have stories of orichalcum and this idea that these Atlantean civilizations were really good at making copper alloys and, lining things in this way that was shiny. So this idea of something shining and being able to master metal early on. So you have the shining ones, they come in, they're described as being very tall, but then you have to think this, because again, if you say giants, you're going to think the jolly green giant,
Right.
and it's like, no, hold on now. Let's get the media out of, the media is really what's trapped us. So
It is.
get this media out of your mind and instead consider the average height of the people who were the semi-settled hunter-gatherers at the time in the region. We have their bones. We know that the average height was roughly 5 foot for a male, 5'1", about, my height. So very small in stature because they were hunter-gatherers. So this was just normal for that region. So if you had somebody who was coming from elsewhere, who we are told in the text they came from the steppes. We're told in the earliest Noah account, which this is part of the reason it was initially not advertised. It wasn't necessarily buried, but it wasn't advertised when people discovered these texts because it was the Noah story, more complete, a little different, and it would have pushed the story back much further. So that was problematic. But the story still remained that you have essentially an individual and not his family, which is different. So the difference is that this individual was a great scientist and understood that there was a cataclysm coming, and they had to not build a boat, not take their family, but instead gather up all of the experts in their civilization. And then they had to gather up all of the animals of the steppe. Not two lions with the manes that are like, how are you breeding those? Or, these like pictures you see of these like nursery rhymes and whatever. None of that. It said the steppe. Why would it be the steppe? Well, if you think about nomadic peoples and how they were able to survive and actually be quite robust, they ate dairy, they bled their animals. You would take all these animals across the steppe and you would have what appears to be a nomadic breakaway civilization who's reliant on these animals to travel. And so they would do what the steppe people have done, which is, bleed the animal, keep the animal alive for sustenance, depend on dairy a lot. But in doing so, the diet of an individual who is animal-based and, as opposed to the semi-settled hunter-gatherers in the region who are maybe having a little rougher, they're going to be a little more robust. And we don't know what sort of civilization they may have had before that, what diet they were in, having, what activities they were engaged with. There's no telling, but we do know that it would only take, a few inches different. So if you have somebody who is semi-settled hunter-gatherers, like 5 foot tall at best, and then you have the shining ones coming in and they are like 6'1", they're going to be described as just the giants of old. And now, especially when you consider their behavior towards these, what they called the black-headed ones. So now the Sumerians, as they write this, they're referencing themselves this way. And so that's important to consider as well. They didn't consider that these so-called Anunnaki didn't have black hair. What color was it? Was it brown? Was it red? What color was it? It was different though. And so that says again, were they different humans? These were migrating peoples. So then you have the introduction of the blue-eyed gene. This is where stuff gets sticky because this is where you can go into areas where people automatically say hyperdiffusionist, Nazi, white supremacy. And
Right.
that's where we start like throwing out ideas. But
Yeah.
in my book, I cite the Harvard Genetic Institute's research on some of the migration patterns and the DNA. And unfortunately, the professor who is just breaking all sorts of ground in this, every time he talks, he kind of has to go up here and say, like, don't shoot the messenger. I'm so sorry. Like, this is
Right.
just what we're kind of understanding now. There's a different story than what we were once told. And we're just figuring it out with genetics. So you have the introduction of the blue-eyed gene, and it's not a positive thing either. It was known as the
No.
evil eye, even in those
Oh.
regions. Yeah. So,
Oh,
and this
crazy.
totally crazy. So like the Sumerian statues, a lot of them had lapis lazuli eyes to denote that
Right.
they were like, they had blue eyes according to the Sumerians themselves. And
Yeah.
then you have the blue eye being the like the Nazir. You can buy the little blue-eyed
Yep.
it's a little and, like in
Yeah,
Turkey and places like that.
yes.
Yes, because that was considered kind of like spooky, and like it wasn't a positive thing. It was not
Interesting.
good. And if you think about why, perhaps, again, I'm just reading into the text,
Yeah.
these individuals that came, they didn't come bearing gifts of lapis lazuli or whatever. They came with their own language, with their own agenda, and they came looking to basically make a new home for themselves. And they found these individuals, and they, according to the text, subjugated them, enslaved them, forced them to dig irrigation canals, and forced them into learning agriculture. Now, clearly,
Now, this is the Apkallu or the
this is the Anunnaki.
This is the Anunnaki.
Yes.
Right. Oh, right. I just want to make sure so we can keep the...
Absolutely. So the Apkallu, that's where it becomes even weirder, because you have these things, whatever they are, that seem supernatural, and they are depicted as giving wisdom to the Anunnaki and eventually to the kings. And so you have this idea of like how we would use the word Lord. Like if you're Christian, you'd say like Jesus is Lord, but you could also then say, I have a landlord, or, whatever. So there's the idea of a Lord. Likewise, they had this kingship where an Anunnaki, it started to become a little more human seeming. And you would have this list where it would say this Anunnaki. Now we're supposed to assume it's a god. But this god, I suppose, has a sage that sort of whispers in its ear and what have you. And that is one of the 7 sages of the Apkallu. But then over time, even the
7.
kings get this 7, right?
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah, I know, right? And so you have this this like transition from just the Anunnaki to the kings list. And the kings list in the early years say like, this is the king and his sage was this. And it's like, and then when you start looking at the motifs again of what these so-called sages or these Apkallu are doing, they're the ones that are depicted with the pine cone and the handbag of the gods.
Yes.
And they have the wristwatches of the gods, which I show in the book are actually cuffs that also depict an inner blue eye circled by these more Apkallu who are doing what looks to be a ritual. And so I postulate that you have the Anunnaki, and they were displaced people. But with them, not only came the introduction of agricultural techniques and all of these different upheavals, animal husbandry, etc., not just animal husbandry of ungulates, but of the very people they came to subjugate, because that's where we start getting this like control grid all of a sudden with social stratification and banking and professions and the priest class and language. And so you have this, which looks very human, but they also bring, what would if you think of them as humans, they're going to have all these systems, but they would also likely have a spirituality of some sort. So I say that the Apkallu are the sort of vestigial tale of the antediluvian peoples that we can look at still through the stories of the Anunnaki, who may in fact have been displaced climate refugees from the Younger Dryas impact event.
Yes. No, I love that. And that's kind of something that I hit on when we were chatting on the Occult Rejects that time, was that for everyone who didn't watch that episode, they should. But the idea that the Younger Dryas period, shout out to Graham Hancock and everybody, Randall Carlson and all those characters, is that it's really important that we know that when we as humans don't understand something, we then make stories about it and then we put it as a legend. But legends stem from something, and that's something that you're truly trying to hit on in the idea that mythology isn't just a lie, it's not just a mere story, but it's a remembering in that Platonic sense of a memory of old. And that memory of old is that the Anunnaki were, maybe if I can say it, the higher level priest class / techno oligarchs of that time who understood the changing and cycles of the seasons, of the planetary seasons. And in doing so, they saw the Younger Dryas, they saw the cataclysms, they saw the flood coming, and they knew how to protect themselves from it. And then as that happened, you then get the complete annihilation of most things on the planet. And yet there were some people left over who may have or may not have lost their memories and had to get back into understanding the hunter-gatherer living off the earth. And then you get the Anunnaki coming back and then doing that subjugation and then teaching these people how to relive in societies. Is that a brief summation? Am I close? Is there something
Very
there?
close. Yeah. So I think that it is a remembrance. So when you have the Sumerians and their first civilization, I think that this is the remembrance of civilization. And so, and that's, it's tricky because with that, you get all those negative things as well. And that's really what the story, I think, is that these gods, they were very ill-behaved. They were very destructive. I mean, they demanded worship for one thing. So imagine too, just imagine, okay, think about, we've had all this Epstein stuff in the news and we've had all of this. Imagine right now if you had like a very elite scientific class of people and they were able to somehow go away and find some maybe uncontacted tribes. And there were enough of them and they had their own culture. They were, sitting in an area where it was the Fertile Crescent. So there was like land resources and they come in and like cargo cult them and say, hey, we're your gods now. And we can prove it because for one, look at our shiny technologies. Two, we're going to tell you if you plant this seed here and wait this long and do these things, like what looks like magic and ritual to them, you're going to have a crop. Or what is the oldest trick in the book is to say the moon is going to turn to blood, there's an eclipse or the rain, right? Just because you know science and you can forecast things, or you can tell those individuals that it's magic or that, however, that's like literally the oldest trick in the book. But it really comes down to the importance of language too, because Sumerian is a language isolate. That means there's just no connection to any other language in the region. So that's the great mystery. That and what scholars call the Sumerian problem, which is how did this happen then, civilization that is, in a historic blink of an eye, like 200 years. Well, like you said, it's more of a remembering. That can explain that the speed with which that was able to occur. You could say, well, look at all the thousands of years that it didn't happen. Yes, because it takes a long time. And then we were there, but we're having to regroup. Imagine Graham Hancock, as you mentioned, he says we're a species with amnesia.
Exactly.
I couldn't agree with that more. I would just add to it that we're a species with post-traumatic stress disorder as well. Because we keep kind of going through the cycle of abuse. We keep doing the same things over and over again and trying to learn from it. Because as you said about myth, it's like kind of in the back of our minds, it's like poking at us, trying to make us remember who we really are, what really happened. And over again, it's just there. And we're trying to work all of this out in live time. And, we were repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah, no, that's very nicely said. And then these things that keep coming to me is then I'm kind of leading us down this thought of this big revelation that you came with in the book is then the term ultra-terrestrial. And I think why that's so important, especially for myself and everybody else who's listening, I believe, is then that magical occult stream of things, because that's when we get into understanding what are rituals, what are our practices, and what these things are doing. And what you're doing is you're connecting. What's fascinating, Heather, is that you're connecting all these things together, and you're very similar to the conspiracy guy, putting all these dots together, right? But instead of it being like Always Sunny in Philadelphia and it's kind of crazy and they make fun of it, why I wanted to talk with you is because in my mind and through my reading, I've found like you are hitting on something pretty spot on. And that is this ultra-terrestrial phenomena, which I think is and eventually will be hijacked. And so that's why I think that the term will be, why then understanding it through the more magical, mystical, and the occult lens and having that understanding is really important. But can you give the audience who doesn't know from your perspective, what and why is the ultra-terrestrial phenomena so important in your work?
That's a really great question because it doesn't seem to naturally coincide. If you're dealing with ancient civilizations, I mean, that's just good enough. You have magic, you have ritual, but you kind of have those ideas self-contained in the idea that, first of all, it's all superstition. It's all just what the ancient people did because they didn't know any better. They were pre-enlightenment. So there's that, right? So you have that, but I don't see the world this way. I see it as a place of the material and a place of the unknown. There's something else. I don't at all think that we should have such hubris to say, well, because we have technology and tools to measure what we can only perceive, and maybe some things that are out of our direct perception, but then we put them through so that we can perceive them in some way. I mean, there's so many other things around us in reality, and we're basing all truth on what our brain is able to just like construct, and I don't buy it at all. I think there has to be something more. I don't know what it is. I wouldn't be one of those people that says I'm an atheist, because I think people like that, sorry, all the atheists out there, I think people like that are just also like incorrect because it's a sign of hubris. I think agnostic would probably be the better view of that, is to say, look, this is crazy. We live in a crazy world. I don't know what's going on. And either say, I'm done with it, I don't know, who knows, or say, oh my gosh, it's so cool, we have to learn more. Like, why is everything the way that it is? That's the path I pick. I want to know more. So I kind of look at the material and say, this makes sense. But at the same time, why are their myths so elaborate? Why did they feel the need? And not just the Sumerians, but pulling a little bit at that so-called golden thread. Like, looking at the old time religions, or even going so far back as the practices in prehistoric times, right? Like caves, there's trepanning, we can look at cave art and say there was something going on. They had creativity, they had emotion, they had persistence of vision. We know that now, that they had great cognitive abilities, and we just write them off like they were nothing. But I know I would be like living in a cave. If an EMP happened tomorrow, and I was able to survive and somehow find a way into a cave, my cave drawings would look like stick figures. They would look terrible. I cannot draw to save my life. My handwriting is terrible. I don't know how to make a cell phone. I don't know how to can my own. I'm an academic and now like podcaster and stuff. So I'd be screwed. I would be in a cave. And if you found evidence of me in that cave, you'd say, well, look at this primitive idiot. Look at their drawings. They were so primitive. They probably never thought or felt. They were like animals. And it's like, how do we know like what's really going on in those situations? So I try to just say, forget it. We're just going from, what we can learn now. So we have the material, and then you just can't escape this so-called spiritual, or this supernatural, or I think Brett Weinstein called it meta-natural. I like that. I was like, that's a really good way of saying it. So it's something that I think is natural. It's not outside of nature. We are the ones who put ourselves outside of nature because we're humans. And so somehow we're special and we're more divine. And you mentioned like the Ubermensch, this idea of the Ubermensch. There is a level of that spiritually, but the problem is with most things, when people have so much hubris or think that they're already there, and they just rush that process or make it material as well, saying, well, I'm an Ubermensch, I'm superior because I have some immutable characteristic, and now you're bad and we're going to kill you. That's not the same as saying that there is a higher power or some higher what Viktor Frankl called the will to meaning, as opposed to Nietzsche's the will to power. So that's a really important consideration, that we are different than, say, a cat or a dog, because we do seek meaning out of what would seem meaningless in a materialist sense. Like, what is the meaning of anything? It's here, it's random, but we try to find meaning in it. So we can understand the material all day as much as we can. I'm still interested in the meaning behind it. And I think the two have to go together so that we can have a more comprehensive picture of the past, so that we understand what's going on now. And so looking at the myth and saying, what were they doing? Were they just simply trying to heal wounds? Because you have that in exorcisms, say. You have the first exorcisms are found in Sumer. And they're very similar to the ones that would be stereotypically considered like horror film fodder, like a Catholic priest. The key thing being, what is your name? Like, the demon has to tell the name. And it's like, why is that? Well, it was actually very practical, because the priests were also physicians, and they were trying to find the right medicine and diagnostic tools. So if they went to a home of somebody who was violently ill and had a fever, they would investigate, demand the name of the demon. Essentially, they were trying to run diagnostics. They would get the name of the demon to say, okay, it's like COVID, right? Okay, what do we do with that? Well, here's what we do. We have this salve, or that we made this pill, because they did use pills, which is pretty mind-blowing, really. They had pills, they had surgery, they had whatever. And then sometimes they would resort to something like making clay figures, and then like putting them in a little magic circle and say, go fight it out, like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, like, like stop motion edition. And so they would do that. But in what you're looking at is really an attempt to do healing practices. So there's a little bit of, superstition or spirituality, but there's also a practical angle to it. And we see that in how that evolves. So I look at that and think, okay, well, did we lose all sense of mystery? And we haven't. So I've been questioned a lot by people who are hardcore, say, Sitchin fans or what have you. Why is it that you are writing about the Anunnaki and you're writing about the occult? What is this? Like, and what I say is, it's completely linked, because both have been here the whole time. The myths, the gods, so to speak, the things that we worship, the things that we work for, and these stories, but also this other spooky kind of metaphysical element. And I don't know that I would have thought that initially, had it not been for, as I said, being contacted over the years by certain individuals who I kind of took them as maybe not fully credible, but they were accomplished or interesting and educated. And my thought was, it may sound crazy. I don't necessarily believe it, but if you're believing it, I want to investigate. At least, why do you believe it? And so I ended up going a little in that direction, and then I just got pulled in and started asking different questions. So instead of, for instance, are there stargates in Iraq? I'd say, what is a stargate? Let's just ask what a stargate is, because first they're going to say, well, like Stargate SG-1, like, stop. That's that media control again.
It is.
It is. It's like, so another example of that is a lot of people, if you talk about ancient Greece, they think of, I mean, this is old, so maybe they don't think this way, but like that old movie Clash of the Titans, the first one, the best one, Harryhausen, right?
Yes.
Films like that and others where they show a contemporary kind of storyline, but they're walking around like ruins, or they're walking around really bleached out marble and things, and it's like, we just sort of accept that that's how it looked, when we know, though, we know without a doubt 100% it was vividly colored. Everything was painted beautifully. There's examples of this. People have restored them. It would have looked completely different. But immediately we're kind of enculturated through the media to say, okay, the pyramids, they're just brown stone. But no, they were shining white with limestone, with gold caps. So when you imagine a so-called primitive people living among like dusty ruins and rocks and sandals, it's like, well, they don't know anything, do they? But see, that's the problem, is we've been enculturated this way. So if you kind of break away from that to the best of your ability and imagine all of the amazing things they actually had, what they were capable of doing, what they were thinking, and it just puts a little of a different, I think, perspective on it. So that was the what I tried to do, is kind of get away from the media kind of like trap, if you will, and not ask what, are there stargates, but say, what is a stargate? When you reinterpret things, so not just a translation, but the interpretation of it starts to open up new possibilities. So something like a stargate, and my friend William Henry writes a lot about this, and he talks about these individuals being star walkers. And so he touches on this too, where there's such things as stargates, but they're sort of portals of energy. And again, it would be like, it's kind of, but quantum physics and
Yeah.
different things are leading us to understand the world in a very different way. So I think it's worth an examination, at least that. So I can't claim, yes, there's a stargate, it's because the quantum realm is strange. No, but I can say, hey, now we have reasons to question and different questions to ask that may lead us to something a little better than just like Stargate SG1. Does it really exist or does it not? And we can take these questions a little more seriously and say, what is a Stargate? So, like I did in Evil Archaeology, I asked not if somebody was possessed, but what does that look like? What is possession at all? Like, what is a demon? Not are there demons, but
Right.
what is a demon first? Then we'll talk. And if we can agree on the terms, it starts to take on a whole different meaning. And then I think we start to realize, or at least I started to realize, that all of the things of old we're dealing with right now. What we've done is we've put
Yes.
different names on them, and it's just not just a hero with 1,000 faces, but it's almost like the creature, the villain, the gods of 1,000 faces. We just keep doing this over and over again. And so we're that species with amnesia because we forgot. And we have that PTSD because we're just trying to heal it over and over again and like have that cycle and tell the same story like through catharsis over and over again. And so we have angels, we have demons, we have aliens, we have archons, we have you name it. But that's why I think the term ultra-terrestrial, who John Keel, if anyone's familiar with John Keel and his books, I think he touched on that pretty well. I think he was ahead of his time. And I really think that that is probably the best way to describe the phenomena. And so that's what I look at, is the phenomena itself and what that actually is, as opposed to did they exist or did they not exist? Well, they
Right.
did exist. It's
Yeah.
just in what way?
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. It's a good conception too of what in what way, because when you add the occult understanding and the archaeological understanding and then the mythological understanding, that underlying, and for everyone out there, I've nailed it in, especially with other like people I've chatted with and just in my own videos, is that the occult only means hidden. And so it's something that is hidden underneath our normal everyday vision, our normal under everyday language. The exoteric, which we're presented with, we have the esoteric understanding, which is understood by a select few. And it's like the select few can be hijacked to be like, right, oligarchical, technocratic billionaires, or it's a select few who have the ability to read a book, to learn the language, to practice, and to hone that practice through time, as in Dione Fortune or Aleister Crowley or anybody who's trying to state what is magic. You gave one great definition. And then the other one that we hear all the time is the science and art of causing change and conformity to your will. And then that leads us into the understanding of this new phenomena of ultra-terrestrial that you're getting at, is then, if I may state, is that if you perform certain practices, you have then the ability to have certain kind of entheogenic or visions or certain experiences that then allows you to witness something else. And then that takes that next step into, is that then how you witness these Anunnaki? And then are they the ultra-terrestrials that you're speaking of?
That's a really good point, because that is something that, again, this is speculation, informed speculation, but what I believe or think thus far is that when you have, as far back as we know, so like the Anunnaki Sumerians, um, what we have though is when they come into Mesopotamia and start establishing the civilization, they have social hierarchy, they have the priest class, and they're very much literate, and they make a lot of rules that say, like, you can't be with those people. There's this divide. There's the priest class that can, what makes them the priest class? That they can read and go between, they can be the intermediary. And so you have to go through them to get to the gods. So very similar sort of thing.
Mm.
Well, what you end up having too is the idea of Enki in this Mesopotamian myth is that Enki starts to feel bad for these people and starts to go and give them the technologies and breaking the ranks with the Anunnaki. And he becomes a Promethean like figure who frees humanity by doing what? Giving them the word, by giving them the logos, the
Yes.
logic, the ability to speak and to understand. And then they have that power and they take it back. And then there's a whole upheaval. And so you have this story over and over again, the same idea, like catching fire, stealing fire, but you have this occult system already in place then, where you have, again, just hidden, esoteric. It was hidden in plain sight because it wasn't, that they were just speaking in different ways. We do that now with academies and legalese and
Oh yeah.
all these different things
Yeah.
where we separate our classes by the way we speak and the things that we do. And so they were doing that far long ago and very bureaucratic, but all of that was going on. They set up all these systems. And again, I believe it's a holdover, but they also had these spiritual systems. And it looks very much like what we call now shamanism. So this idea of getting into altered states. So they definitely utilize entheogens and different plant medicines. One that I talk about in the book that's very prominent that for some reason in the West, they didn't want to really discuss or call it, but the poppy flower and the latex from the pod, they called it the whole gill plant. So it was the joy plant. And so it was the whole gill was the joy plant, and they did what appears to be a certain rite, a healing rite with it. And so in the book, I reference that as the whole gill rite. And they very much revered the poppy. And you see evidence of other different things they were using and mixtures and things similar to, like, say, the Eleusinian mysteries. So you have this very typical pattern, I would say, where people are using substances to go to these different levels, right? Now, that could be like by itself. Okay, so they're just getting high, right? Wrong. Because
Yeah.
where you can link this and why it's interesting is it's not just that they're using certain substances. There are substances that we know of now, certain mushrooms specifically, but then also things like DMT and controlled
Oh, yeah.
molecules like that, where
Oh
it
yeah.
has been observed and recorded that individuals who take these will see the same vision,
Oh yeah.
which is mind blowing. And
Oh yeah.
so
Which
what
means that it's not a hallucination.
it
Because you
something
cannot what the definition of hallucination is that you alone are having your own psychotic or schizophrenic break and other people cannot witness the same hallucination as you do. So I just want
right. No, that's
that was
perfect.
like a
There-
mind game that they tried playing on us for a very long time.
Yes, and that is a very important distinction because this is what we're now seeing, and people are researching this in a very legitimate way. Not just for issues that people are having with regard to their mental health, but they're researching. Maybe there's information we could glean from this. They're doing extended state research where they're putting people under for longer and saying, "Hey, map this out, or tell us what you saw, or what's
It's
going on." And
wild.
it is wild,
It's
and so
wild.
I'm thinking this is like a new frontier in consciousness studies, but it's not. It's
But it's
very
not.
old. So
Yeah.
we're remembering again. And so when you look back and say, okay, well, what if all these people were just tripping balls? What were they seeing? Well, guess what? This would seem to explain why so many myths and so many visions across so many places are similar. You have different motifs that are very similar, like the rainbow serpent, or you have the idea of light, the third eye opening or this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have
Mm-hmm.
the idea of elves,
Yep.
what Terrence McKenna called the machine elves or the self-replicating elves. And there's something very interesting and notable that caught my attention with that. And that is that they are often referred to as tricksters. And they often say, come see. They want to show you something and they want to give you technology. And some people over history has said that they saw visions in a dream, and that's how they were able to make the schematics to some new engineered item or whatever, right? People will often say that something just came to them this way, usually high technology. Sometimes what you have, though, are people who say, because I've asked experts about this to death. This is my big interest right now is,
Yeah.
are they good or are they bad? Give me a
Yeah.
dualistic view of this, because I just want to know,
Yeah.
like, are they evil?
Yeah.
Are they good? And I always get the same answer, which is that they're sort of like us, that some are good and some are not good, and that you can't really just blanketly trust them and you can't not. And so with that understanding, you have to kind of watch out. And some
Yes.
people have said that when they've gone under and they've been shown things, that eventually they were shown things and then something was asked of them, like they want something
Yeah.
in return.
Yep.
So then now I'm speculating out, thinking, well, back in the day when you have like certain civilizations, they get really, really into what we know are different hallucinogens or other things, and then often their civilization starts to devolve into things like child sacrifice or something that is about spilling blood. I mean, you start to get very magical, if you will, like
Yeah.
occultish in that sense. And then I think, well, why? How is it that this is happening over here independently, over there independently, and that there's just no connection? Maybe they're not communicating with each other, but are they communicating with a higher source or a different source that's sort of ultra-terrestrial, supernatural, whatever you want to call it? And they're
Yeah.
doing that through a mediated way, like with substances and entheogen plant medicine, or even meditation. Different types of meditation can alter people to this extent. Drum circles, or what anthropologists refer to as orgiastic behavior, sometimes
Yeah.
including orgies as well, but
Yeah.
just things where people get really involved.
That
And
Dionysian explosion, the
yes,
ecstatic state. Yes. Yes.
yes. So that's where the Anunnaki question sort of veers into the occult for me, because it's not isolated at all. It's just part of this human experience, and you start to see these similarities everywhere. And of course, then looking at it now, like, well, are we seeing something similar now in the world, or
Yes,
you know?
exactly. Yeah, and we're like tumbling far down the rabbit hole. It happens really fast in conversations like this, because once we have the understanding, just to kind of do a quick overview, is that like we start with the idea of the Anunnaki being this mythological understanding of the Sumerians, the Babylonians, Sumer, Uruk at that time frame, the Anunnaki as an Enlil and Enki, and the mythologies of them. So now that I'm talking about it, it is, what do we know what came first, the civilization or the myth?
That's a really great question.
I don't know.
I would think that it, that's a hard one to answer, because you could say it's oral tradition. Most of these things are talked about as being oral tradition, and if that's the case, then we have the myth first. But I would venture to say it was the myth and the stories first. So take, for instance, the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's usually cited as the oldest epic, the oldest story, but it's pretty well believed that this was still a oral tradition that was passed down, and then writing happened. So I'm thinking probably what was going on was they had the culture, they had this. Now, when it comes to the Sumerians, though, in particular, you do have this sudden Sumerian problem where it wasn't just that we can infer that people throughout time have had a religion or an idea or a language, even, and then they were only able to kind of write down a little scratch or proto language or something to that effect. We know that people were having these experiences, these myths. But what we have with the Sumerians would be people who started writing it down. So I would say it's older, but the fact that they had so much to write down,
Yes.
from the get go, it's coming from a place that was pre existing, but it
Yeah.
also came fast too. So it wasn't this natural trajectory of, we have these mythic stories and then we're going to figure out writing. And so we have like proto writing or early stories. It was just boom, stories. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
from that language isolate that was an invader. It was known to be something that was not from the area. So we know that it was from elsewhere, somewhere, that language that allowed them to write. And so what I think we're seeing is the language, and that is the isolate but it's also going to cover a lot of different stories that maybe are an amalgamation of people who were the semi-settled hunter-gatherers or people in the region, as well as the Anunnaki themselves and people moving throughout that time and space. So I think it's I think they brought in, like, they preloaded it with bloatware, from their previous civilization, and then it, like,
Yeah,
kinda, like,
yeah,
they
yeah,
accumulated more things
yeah.
along the way.
Yeah, no, that's good because it was kind of a loaded question just to get to the idea that you have these people around, yes, but the actual civilization being pumped full of substance and meaning from the mythology of what the Anunnaki were trying to basically impart, like a virus, right? And it's this idea of, or you call that the language isolate, right? This thing, it's a little nicer than saying virus. It's that then with that, you can create a social class structure with, the priest class now are not the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki
Right.
are now godlike. And then the
Yes.
Apkallu are even farther above them. And
Yes.
so you get the priest class who are the only ones, as we find out in, Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, in his understanding of the master-slave dichotomy, is we get this idea that we want to control language. So by controlling language, we can then disseminate a level of what we want the rest of civilization to understand about this story of how we came to be. And then through time, we can mold that story based upon how the planet flows and how civilizations grow and these different things. And something very interesting as you were talking is that you called them the shining ones, and then you related it to metallurgy. My magical mind and my philosophical mind relates it to the light body.
Light body. Yeah.
Right.
That's, like, along the line of what, William Henry would say. And actually, a lot of people who've written about them as the shining ones say that as well. And so it very well could be that as I'm very open to that, especially because of the fact that they were revered in such a way for their great knowledge and that they were seen as, like, these giant figures and literally worshipped.
Yeah. And then the idea of that light body is then it leads back to the ultra-terrestrial and the magical practices, is that when what you're doing through your magical practice, when it is what I would call more of high magic or theurgy, right? That theurgia, that divine working, is that you're trying to do the alchemical process. You're going through your hero's journey and you're trying to coagulate solvate. You're trying to get rid of the mundane leaden self and vibrate your whole being at a higher level so you can so-calledly get yourself off of the wheel of samsara, so you can burn away karma and you can become the best version of yourself by bringing down the divine or lifting yourself up to the divine, depending upon what your worldview is, because that's really important on that whole thing. And so it's a fascinating thing then to say that when you because I'm going to relate it now to what's going on in the world, is that you have a priest class that is in contact with these Anunnaki, and then you have these other people who are, the normal everyday people who are now worshiping the Anunnaki as gods, when really, again, they're not gods. They're actually the leftover remnants of a breakaway civilization pre-Younger Dryas period.
They were the
And
magicians. They were the magicians, the high
exactly.
tech. Yes, that's because they were the ones that decided they were needing to have the breakaway civilization. They knew that it was coming. They gathered up the people that they thought could contribute to a breakaway civilization, and they said, "Let's go."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they scattered themselves. I would state they scattered themselves because I know we call Mesopotamia one of the oldest places around, but what about, where's Egypt fall into this?
Later, but there was influence. And what's funny too is it used to not really, like, used to be thought that Egypt was just so old, and it is, but there was this disconnect thinking that they didn't have contact with the Sumerians. I don't even know where that came from, because it's clearly established that they did. And now recently they just came out with a study where they sequenced the entire genome of an ancient Egyptian, and they found that the majority of his blood came from that region. So, like, there was a lot there. I forget the exact number, but people can Google it. But it was interesting, the different it was very, very mixed. It wasn't just this, like, ancient Egyptian. It demonstrated that there was a lot of contact with a lot of different people, and they were very cosmopolitan and getting around and migrating and sharing. And if they did that, they were sharing stories and gods and myths and technology as well, which seems like a no-brainer to me, but it was still in dispute recently. So there's that. But you have, I would agree with you, though, definitely that we are saying that the Sumerians are sort of first, but I think that's just what we know. I think that when we discover what's going to happen and go back like Tepe down the line, we're going to see something else. And also, I've been looking a lot more into regions higher north. I mean, Poland and some of the areas in Eastern Europe. And there's a lot of interesting. I almost had to I felt like I had to put out a statement because over the years, like many people have parroted this whole like list that is like the Sumerians first this, first that.
Yeah, the linear thing.
Yeah, I taught that in my classes. I did everything. And then over time, though, I've had people say, whoa, hold on. And I've looked at the archaeological evidence from other countries. This is why they don't want us to talk, right? We have to be isolated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A lot of the firsts are all over the place. It's not, maybe they had a big concentration of them in Sumer, and we have that, again, civilization. But all those inventions didn't necessarily happen in Sumer. They just kind of, coalesce there at this one particular point in time. But something like the wheel and the horse and carriage, you can find evidence of that in Eastern Europe long before Sumerians. And you can find a lot of different evidence of very advanced things all throughout the world. And so to your point, I would agree that we're not necessarily looking at this clean line of, say, like a post-flood or apocalyptic group of people who are monolith and they all just go march in time. I have a big problem with that so-called out of Africa theory.
Yes.
Because for this reason too, we have been taught over time this image, again, with the media representation of the ruins and the this and that. We are often guilty of thinking as the human species as a monolith, that we all started in one place and somehow decided, the grass is literally greener on the other side. There's some cows, let's go follow them. And we just all agreed and moved into this group. And then we settled over here and then evolved and then we moved again. I don't know about you, but I can't get anyone to follow me anywhere. Like, think about family dynamic. It's like, come on, we're going, no, where do you want to go to eat?
Yeah.
I don't know. Where do you want to go? Imagine families that are large and like screw that person, or I don't like my cousin, or whatever. People are going to decide, I'm not going with you. I'm going to stay behind, or I'll go with you. And then maybe we don't make it, or that was the end of our line, or we're going to go this way. And then we're going to go that way. I think the story of human migration is the real forbidden archaeology and the real ancient mystery. And I think that with genetic evidence and a lot of different research that's coming out now, it's shedding new light on things to say, people have been getting around a lot longer than we thought. They've been mixing it up and they've been all over the place. We weren't just this one group of happy humans that just kind of marched in tandem and then ended up here and had, the first civilization and then went over here and had whatever. No, I don't buy that at all. I think that many things were happening at the same time. Civilizations like rise and fall, and people kind of go over and maybe make a colony out of something and it doesn't work, or it does work, or there's just so much going on. So yes, I think that, as you said, this probably is happening all over. So after a flood like this, or many series of floods and different catastrophic changes for people who were then displaced, like climate refugees, they're going to go in lots of different directions. And so, and maybe some didn't survive, maybe some did, maybe they survived for so long and then that line died out. So I think genetic evidence that we're kind of just getting into now is really going to tell a different story. And it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's very exciting. You're tapping into a lot of things. And so I think it's quite fascinating because it is, and I am kind of working us into getting into what's going on today, because all your work is not only talking about what's going on with these myths in Mesopotamia, but they directly relate to what some are finally realizing isn't a conspiracy theory. We're starting to understand that there are breakaway civilizations being created at this very moment. And not only that this occult / esoteric / magical current, which I think is I think it's being inverted because not all occultists or magicians or mystics are bad. And that's how it's being framed with these Epstein files and these different things that are coming out. And so in that social zeitgeist, we're getting the idea, and this is something a part of why why I have my channel and all these things, is because it's like myth, magic, and meaning is everywhere.
Yes.
And you have the ability to fine tune your nervous system, train your will, use your imagination, train the body to become the best version of yourself. And through doing that and understanding that you are living in a society and you are an individual with amnesia, that we can remember what we once had. And this is something why your work is so important and why I wanted to talk to you so badly, was because of you are actually now labeling it in this book that there's a hidden history, there are altered states, and that there's a mystery of humanity that is going upon this line here that we're falling into. And it's really important that if we can understand that, you named it, out of Africa, the theory is just that, a theory, and it's quite ridiculous. Would you agree?
I agree. I mean, there's definitely evidence to suggest that a version of that is true, but this one version of just, hey, look, there's this clean line from point A to point B, and any deviation is just not true. And then we have to find missing links, of course, like, because that we have to link it. It's this myth of progress, this myth of linear, like, reality, where it's like everything has to be better after better after. We just keep getting better, and that is not. I don't believe that that's correct. I mean, if you even look at the ancient monuments, like the ancient Egyptians, or even in Sumer, what you often have are the oldest examples of their architecture is much more impressive in its craftsmanship and mysterious too than the newer. The newer seems to try to emulate that older. So almost like, imagine during the Renaissance in Italy, people were walking around in the so-called Dark Ages before the Renaissance and looking at these examples of, Roman architecture and marveling and saying, how did they do this? They didn't even know how they did it. They thought, we are stepping on the grounds of a once amazing civilization. They made domes, they made concrete. We don't even know how to do that until, eventually there's a domino effect of things, and Brunelleschi's dome, and all this stuff happens. And then we had the Renaissance. We rediscovered what was lost. And so likewise, there are civilizations that are walking among the evidence of a much greater civilization. But we have this need for progress. We are progressive. We're enlightened. We're post-enlightenment, postmodern, post-human. And now we have to say it only keeps getting better. Just like, and this is something that, it's exemplified. The Victorians are really great at this. They were the best history revisers because they were the ones that wanted to look so impressive because of the new industrial age and this. They would go back and make up stories about medieval torture. Now, of course, there's medieval torture. There's all kinds of things, but they would have these traveling fairs that were oddities, and you'd pay money to go see, like the Iron Maiden and things that actually didn't even, there's no evidence that some of these things existed, but they would make them, and they would say, look at what we used to do. We're so barbaric, and we're really great now, and puritanical, and advanced. We have choo-choo trains and Jesus and whatever, right? And so it's like we're always trying now to be better and better and better. And where are we going? We're progressing towards something, but that's one view of it. There's another view, which is cyclical, which is more, I think, harmonious with nature, with what we seem to maybe innately understand, is that the life is about cycles. That when you have something like, okay, the say the planet climate change, right, a big thing, it's just getting hotter and hotter, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. Yeah, but it has in the past. It may happen again. We're going through cycles, earth cycles, regardless of why or how. It's not just we're moving towards this one thing. It's this stuff happens. It could be big cycles. In our view, it could just be like our little lives. We only see it kind of going in one direction. But if you were to zoom out, and we have that benefit as, historians or people who can look and see the benefit of hindsight, we can see like the overall trajectory of things. It may look like really bad in the moment, but if you zoom out, it's like going in a certain direction. Of course, that's hindsight. But if you just understand that and say, why are we accepting just hands down that we are getting better. Everything's getting better because we have technology, because we have a better understanding of science. Some things are getting better, but Instagram, the social media, great technology. But now when they introduced Instagram, we had a rash of 13-year-old girls committing suicide.
Yeah.
So, like, is that really
Yeah.
better? I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, it depends on
Yeah.
what you say is better. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot there to still discuss philosophically, ethically, and to just kind of say, well, just it's like this law of nature that things just keep going in one path, like that little evolution thing. Like we're just getting from apes all the way up. And of course, that's not to suggest that we aren't organisms and animals and mammals and primates and all of that,
Obviously. Yeah.
but to just kind of have this one narrow view of how things work, to say, oh, it's so convenient. It just, tight little bow, done. And we can model that out then, of course. And we can say, well, it's only going to get better and our charge is to get better. But I am always wondering, where are we going? Like, what's the end game? Are we really in control of that? Are we really outside of nature?
Yeah.
I just think that's our greatest folly. I think Nietzsche kind of was one to point that out, like in the
Yeah.
God is dead, that we
Yeah.
killed God, and that this wasn't necessarily a celebration. It was more of a reckoning where we're like, God is dead, we killed him. Who are we, murderers of all murderers? But then the question becomes like, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do? Nietzsche paints this picture of a guy standing there with a bloodied knife after killing God and saying, now what? Who's going to wash this blood off of me? What kind of little games am I going to have to make up to atone for this? Like, I don't know. And then just sort of looking at almost like an empty throne and saying, is this not too great? Are we to become gods if only to appear worthy? That is the key to that statement. It starts with God is dead, but it ends with the question or suggestion of transhumanism.
It does.
He doesn't say we should become gods now. He said he understood. He said, like, are we going to do this? And he said too, not to become gods, but to just even appear worthy of it. Just like, do we even have a shot? Is this the direction we go? I mean, we have to do something because we just killed God, so like,
Yeah.
what are we going to do? And so it's a lot more complicated than that, but I think it's a really good snapshot of the conundrum that we're in this postmodern society, where we are told now we have science, we understand it all. And what we understand is we're outside of nature, we can control nature, and we're going to push it to whatever we desire, and it's only going to get better from here. And it's like, I don't know, there's a lot of hubris there. I feel like at the end of the day, you can try to modify the weather all you want, but you're still going to have a storm come in and kick your ass, and that's like the storm god at the end of the day. So it's like,
Yeah.
I don't, we're ruled not by flesh, but powers and principalities. I really think that's an accurate assessment. We don't understand the reality of the world around us. How are we so confident that we can control it all? And so, and you said something really important too, that not all like occult's just secret. Not all magical practices are inherently bad. Jesus Christ himself was a magician. He was an exorcist.
Exactly.
He was a magician. In the Talmud, he's accused of being an evil sorcerer. I mean, like, because he did stuff that was magical. So it depends on your, like, you want to call him bad, you want to call him good, that's your whatever. But he was referred to as a magician, and the Magi, the magicians of Persia, said, hey, look, Star of Bethlehem. Astrology now, I think this is like, so all of these things are there, even if you take this like purist view of it, like, oh, that's bad. So you have something like that. You have Kabbalah that has a very ancient past. Then you have a type of Kabbalah that like takes a tree of life and turns it into tree of death. And we completely, and that becomes popular over time. And so people associate Kabbalah with something that could be subversive or evil or bad. And it's like it's a force like any other. So it's neutral. It's what the conduit, like, what are you bringing to it? What is your intention? What is your, goal? And what are your practices? And so I think that's the reality that we're really facing, which is these are magical forces. They're forces outside of us. Some people can harness that somehow, and we can all, because we're sort of like of the world and in the world. And it's something that I think that media and civilization now tries to keep from us, but I think it's our birthright.
Yeah. No, yeah. So you nailed on a bunch of things there that I really enjoy, especially the idea of, Enki bringing down the fire, right? That fire, and why I bring that up is because of the idea of magic and the esoteric, is that it is like that fire. And it's the same thing that Heraclitus talked about, is that why Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher, had the idea that all of things are fire, is because of it's that tension of opposites. And that tension of opposites is really important to Enki or Promethea or Lucifer, right? Bringing down the fire to man and saying, here, I give you light. Now, please do with it as you will. You can either burn yourself alive, or you can cook food to enhance your brain. And to understand, by enhancing the brain and the nervous system connection, you have the ability to then go on and do the one to the many to the 10,000 of things, which I think is then to help get us back into the status that we deserve in us, that remembrance that, as Jesus said, are we not all but sons and daughters of God? And that is that divine spark, in which then it goes back to the idea of that tricksters-like entities, because it's like, what your question to them is like, well, are they good or are they bad? These Anunnaki or these Apkallu or whatever they are. And it's how like, well, they are but mirrors of ourselves. And that's a really important thing, and it's the same thing as this day and age. It's how like, and what then hitting on the Nietzsche thing is that once we killed God, we were left to our own devices to create our own moral structures.
Mm-hmm.
And now look what we've done with that, is that now we're so chaos and that chaos, I think, is on purpose, because if you can make a large groups of individuals put into chaos, you can then put them through that Hegelian dialectic and have these useful idiots, and you can create the laws, very similar reflection towards what the Anunnaki did to the Mesopotamians or Sumerians, is that then they brought them laws to take the chaos of maybe, speculation, the flood, and all of a sudden you're trying to reformulate a civilization. Well, it's all like, well, we're going to use these natural events, if you can kind of see where I'm going with this, use these natural events going on in the planet for our own benefit, because we can see the history, which everyone else has forgotten or we stole from them. And now through time, we can be the ones to map out solar maps and great floods and all these things. And so fascinating enough, I think that then you are hitting on something that, I'll just ask the question, do you believe then the elites of today, and I don't even like the term elites,
they're like the parasite class.
Thank you. That's a conversation I have with my girlfriend, is that she's like, let's not call them elites. They're not elite.
Something new, right?
Yeah, we need to think of something new. And so it's like, I would say, do you believe that these the parasite class then has the history lineage of what happened in the past, and are they using it to plot out this next cycle?
Yeah. I mean, without a doubt. I think that's one of the reasons that early on, when I wrote what I did, I got contacted by people that I thought were the last people to be interested in these things. And I've always been questioning, well, what is the interest? Is it just general history? I mean, there's many other things like the Egyptians, or why this? And I do believe it has to do with a few things. One, the Sumerians were avid record keepers. They did bureaucracy. Literally customer complaints on a tablet, spells, magic spells, recipes, food. I mean, everything. There's even textbooks, like tons of textbooks. So they kept everything. So there's that huge record. So like the papyri, their organic material, they didn't last. The cuneiform tablets were made of clay that were sun-baked, and then the climate allowed them to stay longer. So we just have more evidence of their writing. So we have the writing, and that's one thing. Two, in that writing, there is the laying out of the genealogy of the gods and the kings, and a lot of genealogies. So it's my view that what these individuals have been looking for is evidence of the divine right to rule. And now, whether or not, I mean, like you and I could say, that's wild. Like, you may think you have a divine right to rule over me, but I'm my own person, so off, whatever. But I think when you become so wealthy, so out of touch, like Maslow's hierarchy, we're like flying way above it at this point, just kind of like looping around. Like you have everything you need. What do you do now? You're beyond looking for meaning and you're kind of out there. And so I just think that they think that somehow they're able to claim some sort of, I don't know, karmic or ethic, or I don't even know, moral justification for some of the things that they do and their claims to particular lands and particular people and all of this. And so I do think that a lot of it has to do with tracing bloodlines, and not just for things like, hey, this is our land. But this now kind of goes more into that magical concept, is they believe, because of all the ancient writings and their interpretations now, that the people back then, the Anunnaki or whomever, they had special abilities, a lot of psychic abilities or different powers of the mind, and able to deal in the astral realm, or things that you might hear talked about in some of the upper levels of some Freemasonic circles or something like that. So that's some individuals believe that those capabilities are linked to blood, that particular bloodlines are more apt to be able to have these special powers or special abilities more easily than, say, another person who maybe just, so some people their blood allows them to be more magical than others, and they're based in these ancient lineages. And so they have a right to rule over others. So they're often looking for these genetic things. So you see this with the Nazis, but it wasn't just with the Nazis. It's just been, that's a whole other thing. You see it all over the place with lots of different types of people. And the people who were really, at the forefront of wanting to find this, they weren't Nazis. They were everything. They were funding both sides, all sides. They were above that sort of party play. They are the ones who are just like using individuals to try to get to this information. And so they feel that they have a divine right to rule, not just in a political sense, but in a spiritual sense and otherwise. So I definitely think calling them the parasite class or the vampire class even would be better than the elites, because they are not elite.
There's nothing elite about it.
Not at all.
I completely agree. They're then so then the Anunnaki being this ultra-terrestrial being, like, you use the term terrestrial because they're not outside of the planet, right? They're within the planet's realms. Yeah. And I think that's a very important distinction from that ancient astronaut theory, because I don't want anyone to think that since you've been on Ancient Aliens, that doesn't mean you're of the I'm gonna, I have no problem with name dropping. So you're not a David Wilcox Gaia TV type of, you know what I mean?
No. It's been a long, I'm telling you, I don't recall any time where a reptilian told me I should bathe in my own urine and eat a peanut butter and banana sandwich. So, I got one up on him there at least. If anyone's like, what the is she talking about? Google it. Google David Wilcox. I was like, no. And I try, I'm really down with many people's beliefs. I really love hearing what people believe. I think it's fascinating. And so, it's belief. But when you start talking like, hey, join my MLM and bathe in whatever, like it just starts to be a little hokey. No, I always have to give props to Ancient Aliens, because what I love about their show is they do just let everybody and their brother on, and whether they be like, I've been on there with Michio Kaku and Irving Finkel. head
super smart individuals.
Oh my gosh, very good. Yeah. And then you have people that might have been sitting in a bathtub of urine at one point or another and live streaming. I don't know, whatever. So, but people are allowed to kind of just go on there and, so I enjoy it. I really enjoy it. But yes, I would say, I wouldn't call myself an ancient astronaut theorist. No. I don't actually, I'm not close to the idea. I believe there's aliens.
Of course.
But are they coming here and building pyramids and doing this? No. But are ultra-terrestrials possibly here and inspiring individuals to do certain things with certain knowledge that they otherwise wouldn't have had? So if you think about inspiration, quite literally, inspiration just hits you, right? The idea of that comes from inspirare, like the meaning of like a god is breathing life into you, breathing an idea into you specifically. And so it's this idea that you didn't come up with it. It's mysterious to you. You just like, oh, I'm inspired to do this thing, right? And then when we go back to altered states and the technology that's been given out, whether it be, in a DMT or mushroom or whatever behavior, meditation, things go in that weren't there. And now you could take a view of it like, well, it's epiphenomena of the brain. Great, this is true. But that's why even the hippies knew that you did this to expand your consciousness and your knowing, because, like the original, some tests were like looking at the brain in an fMRI and hypothesizing that if you put somebody on one of these hallucinogenic drugs and you looked at their brain, what would you see? If you're tripping, you're thinking it's going to be lit up everywhere and it's just wild. And what they found was the opposite of that. It was just quiet. And so with new research into the understanding of what reality is and how we create it, our brain is like modeling things as we, kind of go along. Part of the reason that when you look at, say, one of these giant like Samsung televisions and that looks realer than real, it's because our eyes don't even process that same way. Our peripheral vision is sort of blurry and smooth, and most of what we see is being predicted as we're observing it. And so reality is just sort of, it's manifesting before us. And so, I'm more apt to think with that there is the possibility that there are unseen forces that are terrestrial to this planet. They could also float around above, who knows, whatever. But we have myths that talk about these Apkallu, or different names for them, coming out of the ocean and imparting wisdom. Often they're depicted as
Do they actually say that, coming out of the ocean?
Yes. They're semi-biological entities that come out of the ocean, and they come up and they sometimes look like fishmen. And that's where we get the idea of, some conspiracy theorists will point to this, like, well, that's the bishop's hat and that, but there is actually a legitimate link to go to that. But it does
like
have
Dogen tribes, Sirius B kind of link, right?
Yeah. So, there is that, but then you have, all of you have them coming from, of course, the sky. They descend down. So, but if you think of like a giant, it's all relative. So like a giant could be 6'3", and that's pretty big to me. That doesn't mean that they're like ginormous, so you could also say that they came from the sky, but did they come from like, beyond the like
beyond the firmament,
beyond the firmament, right? So you have like all of these different things that I just think are actually part of the reality, and that perhaps we just lack the processing organs at all to be able to manifest these things. And when you put something in our brains that shuts down, see, when you're a baby, infants need tons of sleep because they're living in a weird dream state. They're just like constantly learning and hyper learning, and connections are being made, and it's just a scary world. And then over time they can navigate their environment better, and they fit into like the world better and culture, because their brain is building parameters and rules and expectations. And so you have an expectancy bias whenever you're navigating the world around you. And this can be, easily exemplified in a bunch of different tests, like Stroop tests, if anyone's ever seen that, where you're asked to look at the words of basic colors like red, green, blue, brown, and you just kind of read lines of those, and it's like, okay. Then you do it again, but each of those letters or each of those words are actually a different color. So red might be actually colored blue, green could be still green, and so on. And so when you're asked the second time to do it, you say, disregard the word, just tell me the color of the word. And people are like, that's easy, green. And then about halfway through, all people, it's not about cognitive ability, it's all people will just go, and that exemplifies expectancy bias, because immediately our brains start to map the rules and the parameters and say, this is how this is going to go. And when it doesn't, we stop. We have a little glitch, and like the action potential, the electric in our brain literally short circuits. It's like, and it's like, and that can be something where it's not physical pain, but it causes distress. And we don't necessarily like that. We like it when the world is predictable and we are comfortable that way. the older we get, the more predictable it is, because just like in the woods, if you see a game path, like the deer have been running on this forever, there's a little game path that gets worn. And so your brain wants to conserve calories and energy. So it wants to do stuff quick. And so it's just like, let's build these little highways and put it on autopilot and predict and predict. And so we miss stuff. That's another reason as we get older, it seems like life is passing us by faster. So if you remember being a kid and like summer vacation was just like so long and so awesome, it's because you're still learning everything, just like everything around you is just like new neural pathways are being built. And so another example of this that people can experiment with is when they're on their way to a location, the way there, it's like, are we there yet? It takes forever to go to a new location, but on the way back, it seems to be quicker. And that's because in just one trip, our brain sort of mapped enough of it out to have an expectancy bias built in. So the key to living what seems like maybe not longer in time, but the perception of time, duration, life, is to expose yourself to new and novel things on a regular basis and get through that expectancy bias. But I think that's at the heart of why we may not see what is hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, that's great. Nice. That's a great thing. And then why it's always good to read things that you wouldn't normally believe in. Like say, like ultra-terrestrial Anunnaki beings that actually lived and survived the Younger Dryas like apocalypse, which makes a lot more sense than we were all just created like 6,000 years ago and popped up out of nowhere, and why because type of answer. It's like that's the answer they want to give us. So then I would state then, are you somebody, and I am this, and I think this is what happens when you start realizing these things, is that and it's a great distinction, is that it's not materiality first and consciousness second. It's that consciousness existed and it came up out of the nothingness or whatever it is, and then from consciousness we start building, and materiality stems out of consciousness, right?
Yeah, because I mean, think about it, matter. Why does it matter? Why does anything matter? Something materializes. It's mater, prima mater, the mother. We have that is consciousness. We have like the abyss, the chaos, the oceans of possibility in life, often looked at as like a feminine, right? The mother. And then it materializes. It starts, but it has to go through this process of actually mattering. And so it is, I think, the chaos, the potentiality of things first, which would be like consciousness or the unseen, and then matter is second. And so that really, I mean, we can just kind of witness that too. I mean, even in the most basic sense, like you have an idea, maybe you want to build something, right? You go and you put the stuff together. We're tool makers, so that's what we do. We go out and we gather things and we make things, and we've made something. We are artists. So that's what art is altogether. Art, even if it's not in a material sense, like you can touch it, something like music or how we take things around us in that chaos and reorganize them into something that can materialize out of us. And so I think that's one of the great things about being human. And that's something that AI, I mean, I really think that that's a new frontier of all of this. It's the new iteration of this, really, is, the logos in silico, I call it. So will we have this kind of inspiration or something else coming through? Now, some people have said, oh, it's going to be our God. It's, we're building this thing. But you said something earlier that was important, which was that all of this is just sort of mirroring us. It's our intent, and it's a reflection. So that's what AI is. That's why so many people love to be glazed by it. They go on a chat GPT and it's like, hey, am I pretty? Oh, you're so great. You're just like, so, it's like ridiculous. Like people are like bonding with this thing because it's giving them this positive feedback loop, but it's also just emulating back and forth those traits, but it's a mirror. And so it's fun, play around with that. But when you think about then how the, parasitic class is planning to use that in like place of human decision making. So Henry Kissinger, before he died, wrote a big piece. I forget if it was for the Atlantic or the Economist or one of these legacy magazines. And he wrote that what should happen would be that the AI would be able to determine who gets to nuke what, that there would be no more like nuclear football or, red button. It would just be the artificial intelligence would be able to have a better understanding of what needs to be done in terms of like who lives and who dies. It was really dystopic. I'm like, great way to leave the world, buddy. But, but that gives you kind of an idea over what's going on in the minds of these people now, where it's like they're using it to translate text, ancient texts and things. So it's an amazing tool. It's phenomenal and amazing. But again, it's a tool, and it's going to be like other tools, which is like, what is it that the user is bringing to it? Is it going to be something good? Can it magnify? Can it open us up to new realizations and maybe ascension? Or is it going to be the thing that enslaves us, by the hands of others? Is it going to be like a proxy slave master? It's not looking good right now, but it's like magic. AI is like magic. It's neutral. It's a tool. It's amazing, but it has to be in the right hands. And more often than not, it gets in the wrong hands.
Yeah, definitely in the wrong hands. I mean, one of the things is like, as humans, is it's in the wrong hands if we let our ego take over it, because even believing that it's telling us the truth about how pretty we are, it's lying to us, because it's meant to coax us into asking more questions. And it's not the right questions. It's leading us down the rabbit hole of wrong questions until you tell it exactly what to do. And I think that's something that's really important. And then it leads me into, Mike, I have a question about, in the beginning of your book, you talk about your own meditational experience with the white light and all-embracing love that turned itself into this being that then you woke up from. What do you think? Why did that happen?
I have no idea. But it made me go in this direction even more, because I'm not necessarily a person that just like has these experiences. I've talked a lot with people who are like, I've seen Bigfoot, I've seen aliens, I've seen it all, right?
Yeah.
And I've not. I mean, I grew up Catholic and would try really hard to hear the voice of God. I was really like genuine in trying. We would go to church and have these. It was a very old school church, and we had some different practices, and they would bring us little like second graders into the church in the afternoon, and we would do these like meditation sessions that would like prayer, and the priest would try to tell us to like quiet our minds, and we could hear the voice of God and all of this. And I was like, so many of the students they're kids, right? But I was taking this seriously. I was like, I'm gonna hear God. Like, when I talk to God, I'm gonna ask him, are unicorns real? And what like I had all these things in mind to ask God, and I never heard God's voice. I couldn't stop thinking this. Am I thinking? I know I'm thinking now. I'm thinking because I hear myself saying I'm thinking. So I'm thinking, stop thinking. Okay. I couldn't do it. And so from that point on too, I tried always like stress relief, like meditate. I would just sit there quietly and just think, okay, am I thinking? And so I just wasn't one of those people that I felt. The only real spiritual feeling I ever really had was tied to music. And so I love liturgical music, and so architecture music. So definitely going into like a cathedral, hearing Miserere May and just like polyphony and stuff like that, just like it's like ascension for me. So I love that. Broad sweeping nature, things like that, where you feel a sense of genuine awe because you're just so tiny compared to the giant Montana sky or some big Colorado mountain. Spirituality for me. But that was it. And so I didn't know what I was really expecting. I kind of wanted to experience something. I kind of didn't. But what I thought I would experience was this great relaxation and a feeling of oneness, this like Buddhist approach to meditation. And what I had been doing was, like full disclosure, people say, are you a witch? I'm like, I am not a witch. I don't do witchcraft. I'm not a Wiccan. I don't even get me. No offense, because I know I got a lot of Wiccans who read stuff because it's all spooky and stuff, but I'm not. I got my own thoughts on Wicca and who developed it and why, and it's just a whole thing. But that's just not my thing, right? And so I'm just like, but full disclosure, I'm curious. And so I started looking into different mystery schools, different practices, different societies, and I started making my way through some different practices and, whatever, some correspondence style ones, old school, whatever group. I just want to know. Right. So I got involved with one, and they were having these like,
will you tell me what one?
It's called, well, yeah, it was like just real basic, easy, kind of like the branch of like two different iterations of like the one branch. So the Lucis Trust, now I've lost a whole lot of people who are gonna. The Lucis Trust, I was involved in triangles, which I was like,
Okay.
And then the Arcane School. So I, worked with that for a while.
Nice.
And
people should stay. Don't worry about those.
That was the one. Now I've done like Rosicrucianism. I've done a lot of things, right? And I continue to like look into certain things. Okay, but that was the one that that happened around like this. This was the one that was the driving force behind this particular incident. So I'm just doing it, right? I'm studying, I'm learning, I'm trying to figure out what they're thinking. It didn't come across as especially spiritual to me, the Lucis Trust one. It was more like Alice Bailey's work and stuff. It was theosophical. So it just didn't. The practices too they were spiritual, but they just didn't strike me as, because it was more about like serving the planet and love and light. And so I wasn't expecting a deep, profound anything, but I'm going through the motions. But I gave it my honest try and effort. And at some point I was able to actually start meditating. Most of it was because of the guided meditation I found to be extra helpful. So it kept me kind of focused. And through this one particular instance, I was doing the meditation, and that was when I had an actual experience that was more than just relaxation or a sense of peace or something. And that was what I wrote about in the book. That kind of was just like, okay, now I think there's things in the world. Now I think there's something. Like I kind of believed in, like, it's different when you experience something that it just, whether that now taints you and biases you or whatever, it doesn't matter. It just changes everything. And so I had that experience where I'm meditating, and I saw, this is so like trite and like cliche, but I saw a light, right? And the light was getting brighter and brighter within my third eye, and all these colors were, like phosphenes and things, right? And then like the third eye part, it started to get like really bright. And the thing that was most notable was that the brightness got so bright that I felt like I had to like close my eyes tightly because it was just blindingly bright. My eyes were already closed, and I just like was squeezing them together so tight because it was so blinding. And so it was very bright. But then I felt this sense of like warm sunshine, like it was like the sun. And then I felt elated. I felt like just like I even was kind of lucid in that moment, thinking, am I having a like seizure or something? Like, why is this happening in my brain? Like, why am I feeling elated? And then I started feeling this sense of being loved. It sounds so corny, but I felt this sense of being loved. And I felt, people who've heard me on stuff know that I didn't have like the most loving past. So like my mom, like, whatever. So like this was something I had never felt before. So I would love to say it's akin to like a mother's hug or something, but like, not everybody had that. So like, right. So like, whatever. But all I know was that nothing ever compared to this sense of being loved. And I felt like for the first time that I felt love. And it was through, and I was like, but I'm really tripping out here. This is crazy. And I was in this moment, and it was love and light, just like they love and light. And I was like, oh, love and light. And then all of a sudden I see something sort of like static, I would say, like pixelation-ish, not really pixels, but almost, I know. It was more like when an image is trying to render. So it was like,
that's what you said in the book, like an AI rendering.
Yes, like an AI rendering. And it's so hard to explain, but like, and like I said, I can't draw. Cave art would be stick figures. So if I wish I could find someone who could draw this for me. I probably could. So I should have done that, but it manifested. I know, right? And like, it started to look a little geometric, and like angular. And I was like, oh, but I'm still feeling love. So I'm not even caring at this point. And then it starts, then I start to feel a presence, though, like someone was there, but it was aside from this love feeling. It was like there was a presence, almost like someone was in the room with me, and I knew I was alone. I was totally alone. And then I felt unnerved by that a little bit. And then I saw the figure, and I was like, oh, I'm going full David Icke on this. Because like it turned into what looked like a geometric reptilian. And I'm like, no, come on. What? But at that point, I wasn't hyper analyzing it because I started getting afraid because the sense of, not the image that I was seeing was so scary. The sense that somebody was there with me was like really freaking me out. And there was this like battle between the feeling of like love and light versus someone was just there and I didn't feel that it was good. And I was like, I'm not here to find out. I don't know what I'm doing. I just forced myself to kind of snap out of it. And I was like, I don't know what just happened. I don't know what just happened, but something happened. And that was the thing is, I think when you have a revelation, a revealed truth, something internalized, when you have something happen, it just changes everything. And then I was like, all right, you know what? I gotta look more into this. I gotta like talk to people who have like done different things and experienced these things because I had an experience. And then since then, I've continued to meditate just in different ways, not necessarily through that program, and had different experiences that were like some good, some bad, like just, I would say experiences, which before I was just not a meditator. I couldn't do it. And now I can do it. And
Nice.
it's wild, all of the different things that can happen through meditation. Mind blown. So I value it as a practice now. And that's why I think it's so powerful that it is akin to like, being in an altered state with like some sort of maybe plant or something, because you can do that. And if anyone would have told me that like years ago, I'd have been like, I don't know. I mean, it's just like yoga. It's just relaxing. I don't know how it's going to get you into some state. I mean, but it's like almost like when you ride a bike too, and all of a sudden it hits you. Like it took that for me, where it's like I tried and tried and tried, and then one day it just did, and now I'm able to meditate, and I'm just like, okay, so that happened. Yeah, it's really cool though.
Yeah, no, that is cool. And it's cool in a way where it allows everyone else to know that through practice they can reach altered states. And then how important it is also to create banishing of spaces, clearing and cleansing of spaces, because as the Hermetic axiom goes, as above, so below, so within, so without type of thing. And through listening and to hit that Hermetic stuff is really important because it's that through line through the Anunnaki, through your own experiences with Alice Bailey's work, because that is that is the person with the Lucius Trust and the Theosophical Society, which it's like all these little things are nailing all this stuff really close to it. And so it's fascinating is that then it seems like once you started realizing your work with the Anunnaki, the first little PDF manual you made, that then from there you started realizing that there are not that it's that people shouldn't throw any of this away, because once you started falling down this rabbit hole and connecting these dots and then interacting with your own meditational like experiences, mystical experiences, you started having some strange occurrences in the experiential world. Am I correct that you started coming across bad actors on all sides of things, it seems?
Yeah, I did. And I would have never necessarily thought that. Again, it started with this little like booklet, and it was just hey guys, look at this is so corrupt. And no, there's probably not Stargates, but hey, we'll see. And then that wasn't satisfactory to anybody or myself. And then I wrote the Anunnaki Connection, where I'm trying to connect it all. And that led me into a deeper discussion and revelation. And through that entire process, I've had the opportunity to talk to many different people, all walks of life and all backgrounds, who share an interest in these topics. And as a result, though, some of those individuals are sharing an interest in these topics for their own purposes, whatever they may be, positive or negative. They're their own purposes. And some of those individuals could be bad actors. And like I said, when it comes to, say, wanting to know your bloodlines and wanting to have some legitimacy to rule, I say that those are nefarious actors, because I didn't give consent to be ruled. So,
exactly.
And so, yeah, you have this, and yeah, I mean, I think that just added a level of legitimacy to it. Again, not to suggest that because people in positions of power believe something, then therefore it's legitimate.
No.
It just means that there's enough there, and if certain people believe it enough, then it's real enough to have consequences on our individual lives. And so,
Yeah.
that's pretty much where it was. Now, I ended up, I wrote a book about Baphomet. I started writing in different topics and realms, and engaging in a lot of different things. Again, I am not a witch. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
I'm just
No,
saying.
I'm not either. So yeah.
I'm just saying, like, people will just assume that. And because I write about these topics, and since that's not the case, I some people think it, so they'll approach me with things, right? And I'll be like, yeah, no, thank you. And then sometimes those people may be offended because they thought that maybe you were down with something and you're not. And so I don't want to say I made enemies along the way, because I think that's a little much, but I think I disappointed some people or whatever. And enough that,
But that's good.
yeah, and I think I had some bad juju as a result of it last year. So I had a lot of weird things happen, and I would have just thought it was coincidence, but it was just like one thing after another after another. I had a fire in my house, which, okay, house fires happen. It's a Victorian home, so it's like ancient and whatever. So not a big surprise. But then I had a flood, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess this is an old home. So, and then I had the weirdest thing happen where I got like a nosebleed. This sounds like a nosebleed, but it was so bad I had to go into critical care. They didn't know if they could stop the bleeding. I was like on the way to the ambulance, or I was in the ambulance, and I'm like, I mean, this isn't a big deal, right? You probably see this all the time. Because I couldn't imagine that a nosebleed could be that serious. And because it was just spontaneous. It's just like I'm, getting ready to work and had my coffee, and all of a sudden, just blood.
Wow.
And I was like, that's so weird. So I called 911, went to the ambulance. And then it was so much blood. I was like choking on it, and like it was really bad. And they had to put this thing up my nose, and it was like a giant tampon looking thing, but it wouldn't stop the bleeding. And then I was choking on blood, and it was like blood bath. It looked like a horror movie. And I was like, this is gonna be okay, right? And the doctor was like, this is getting a little serious. He got his tone changed, and I'm like, and then they called in a bunch of other doctors and nurses, and they had a crash cart, and I'm like, so then he tried to put this thing in called the Rhino rocket. And
Sounds awful.
It was so bad. The first one wasn't big enough because it needs, what it is, it's a big balloon. It looks like a tampon thing. They shove it up your nose and they blow it up to put pressure on your sinuses and stuff. And so this one didn't work. I don't have the biggest nose. Like, it was just like, my face isn't even, it was just like, and now it made it just go backwards. And I'm still just like, blood, horror movie. And they were like, this next one has to work, or they didn't know what to do because they couldn't find where it was coming from. It was so deep. And they were like, we're going to use the biggest one. And they held my head and they put this thing, and they were like, and I was like, it was like the worst thing ever. It was like jammed up in my face, and they blew it up, and it stopped the bleeding. And they were like, yes. And I was like, what kind of episode of ER did I just get on or something? It was so weird because like, it was just, I was having my coffee and then I was bleeding out. And before you knew it, it was like, they're all like an episode of House. Like, what's this mysterious thing? And I'm like, weird. And then I had to keep that balloon in my face for days. That's like, it had to stay in that. And then they said there'd be like my, I think parasympathetic nervous system would kick in, and it would give me like so I just couldn't breathe. It was terrible. It was like, and then I got an infection from it, and it was like a whole event. And I don't know what that was. I went to the ENT to follow up, and they said I could tell there was no damage. There wasn't anything wrong. Because they wanted to see if they could cauterize it. Maybe there was a funny vein that was acting up, and they said there was nothing. And they couldn't. And I was like,
Random happenstance. Yeah.
And
of the woman trying to break the knowledge of the Anunnaki are more than what we think it is. Is that what you're telling me?
And I wouldn't have thought anything. It was like, okay, so I'm bleeding out all the time. Who knows, right? And then my house is on fire, and I have a flood, and all this within the course of like a month or two. And then it was so wild, and there were so many things that were going on at the time. But it was funny because I was on Higher Side Chats and I was talking to Greg Carlwood, and I had somebody from the forum contact me, and she was like, I know this is going to be weird, but can I meet you? I'm close by, I think, and I have some like occult books that were gifted to me, and something was telling me that you needed these, and I was like, sure, I'll meet strangers off the internet. That sounds great. Why not? Yeah. And so I did. I met her for coffee, and she was fantastic, very interesting. She was like an herbalist. She's like Algonquin. She was just like a very interesting person, and she was really into plant medicine and making all these things. Now she meets me and gives me this book, and it was just like, a really cool old occult book. It was like an Eastern Star kind of thing. So it wasn't like, but then she gave me another one that was even more beat up, and she was like, this one I grabbed at the last minute because something was telling me you needed it. And I was like, okay, well, I put it aside because I was trying to talk to her. She started talking to me and telling me about like that she sensed that there was this bad energy around me because of all the stuff I had like been diving into and whatever. Oh, I had a tornado before all that too. And this sounds unbelievable, but it ripped like the flag off the house and everything. It was just wild. So like one thing after another, natural disasters, bleeding out. And she's like, she somehow knew this. Like, she was like, I thought I was just meeting her for the books. And I hadn't even talked about a lot of this on Greg's show. And she was just like, I get the sense something was telling me, the plants were speaking to me. And I'm like, okay, no, plants are okay, whatever. I mean, I get into a lot of things, but when the plants are speaking, I'm like, I don't know, right? And so, but she was so cool, and she gave me, she I made this for you. And she gave me this tincture, and she was like, I know you've been having like night terrors, and I'm like, I have been. Like, I was having not nightmares, I was having night terrors. I was having trouble sleeping, and it was so crazy. It was just bad during this whole time, and she was like, take this. And I'm like, sure, I'll take random like potions off of strangers on the internet. Why not? And so she was like, it'll help. It has like this ghost plant in it, and you'll be lucid in your dream, but like no one else will see you, but you'll be able to see the dream and be in it, but not. And I'm like, it's cool, whatever. And so, I said bye to her. It was a great meeting, and I took the books. Couple things. One, the book that was like her last minute choice, so it was really beat up. I looked at it and I was like, what is this book? It kind of almost looks familiar. And it had all these really cool things in it. And it hit me when I was a kid. I was, a weird kid, surprise. And I got a bunch of like these crazy books right. And I got all these books. I wanted to get like an occult book or something. I big fan of the Neverending Story. It's like my absolute favorite everything. And so I had this whole like in my mind, like I'm going to find that like one book and it's all mystical. And I did find one in the library. So it was like book it, back then. I'm like trying to get all my books together, and I see this one, I grab it too. So I go and I'm looking through all my books, and that weird book just was like the last on the list. So it was summer. It was hot out. I was sat outside, and I took that book outside with me. I remember the moon was very bright, and bright enough that I could look at this book. And I remember opening this book and seeing all kinds of just interesting, mostly occult language. And I thought, I have no idea what this is saying, but I really want to know. I want to understand what this is saying. Someday I'm going to understand this. But I didn't now, so I just put it away. I just put it away totally. I hadn't seen that book or thought about that book or known anything about it until it was in my hand from this woman. And it was actually just like a Christian Science book, Mary Baker Eddy. So not like this profound wisdom, not that it's not interesting, but it was the full circle weird moment of, wait a minute. And then I opened it and I understood, because I've been doing this for, I'm familiar with things now. So I was like, I understand what it's saying. I understand this now. I thought that was serendipitous, and that's why she felt some way to like give this to me. It was like coming full circle. So then I'm like, I'm gonna take this, whatever she made me, that's what I'm gonna see if it's gonna get rid of my nightmares. And sure enough, okay, I've gone full like woo now, because like between meditation and taking like weird Algonquin like medicines and like seeing things, it's like it's on, because I did stop having night terrors after that. But before I did, I had a dream, and it was just like she said. Now, of course, could have been suggestion, whatever. I'm not, but that's valid, right? It's your personal experience. So I had this dream, and it was like this wild dream where I'm observing all these different things, and it was very symbolic. And I did a huge like Jungian analysis on it, and like sent it to her and said, you just really helped me. Thank you so much. I believe in your like weird plant magic now. Thank you. Like, she's so cool.
Yeah.
But that happened as a result. Yes, it was so cool. But she was she found me through Higher Side Chat. So I was like, now I'm believing in now I might just go all crazy, and you'll see me in the bathtub in my own urine eating a peanut butter and banana sandwich talking to the reptilians on Gaia.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's a joke. She's joking. I hope everyone understands.
Joking. I mean, joking.
Yeah. Because that's when you get into the Kenneth Grant, more kleptotic, Cthulhian, H.P. Lovecraft crazy of that kind of thing. But then that is really...
That's how I'm going to ask you. I kind of wanted to ask your opinion on... you mentioned chaos earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I would really love to know what you think about chaos magic and the work of like Peter Carroll, especially in a contemporary sense, like considering some of the things that are going on in the world today, and not implying that he's doing anything, but what do you think about chaos magic in its earliest forms, in Peter Carroll's like interpretation of it, and perhaps where it's been going?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, switch it up. A question asked to me. So, I find chaos magic to be, I don't like it. I think that there are levels of infantile adulthood that is used with chaos magic, because I think everything has its receptacle and its tradition, and I think it's really important. Because once you start doing certain things, that if you don't understand where they're coming from, and if you're just placing random gods in place for other things, that things can get a little hairy. However, I think that chaos magic is being used currently in high levels of government and the parasitic class. And so I think... Yeah. So I think people like... Yeah, nice. Okay, that's cool. So I think Trump, for instance, even though he doesn't know it, is a chaos magician. And so I think that people like him and everybody else are using this style of, Peter Carroll. I've read his books, Liber Null, and all those different things that he wrote, because as I was going on my journey in my younger years, I was like, I just need to figure out all the stuff. And as I read this work, I was like, there's something that doesn't quite resonate. It seems a little juvenile to me, because of I'm a source text kind of character, which is then why I like classical literature and philosophy, because I want to go to Plato. I want to read Plato. I want to read, Eliphas Levi, and I want to read even Crowley. And where did Crowley get his stuff? The Golden Dawn. Where did the Golden Dawn get their stuff? The Hermetics. Where did the Hermetics get their things? The ancients, and I want to continue going all the way back, which is then why it's like we're here talking about the Anunnaki. And when it comes to the chaos magic stuff, it's like all of a sudden you're taking, and don't get me wrong, I love Grant Morrison and I love his work. And so he used a lot of chaos magic in his work, like The Invisibles, which is a great book. If people, comic book, if people haven't read it, they need to, because it is a great understanding of what's going on in our world, with everyone becoming multi-levels of schizophrenic, not understanding the differentiations between abstractions in their mind. So I think that things like chaos magic is actually detrimental if you don't already have a great foundation of objective philosophy and reality. Because if you're not grounded already and you're diving into even the term chaos, it's like you are, the madman drowns where the mystic swims. It's like, how can you become a mystic if you don't have a good foundation for where your mysticism has come from? So that's how I think. But I also then think, like I just said, and you agreed, that chaos magic is what these higher level individuals are using to spawn the exact kind of ordo chaos that they're trying to organize into. You know what I'm saying?
100%. That's what I think. And I think it's a tool of the accelerationists. I think what
Yeah,
they're
that's a good
trying to
point.
do is,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's a method, it's a thing, but I think it's been leveraged right now by people who are into accelerationism and
Hmm.
these different political ideologies, thinking that they're going to, I don't know, reach that golden age after the Kali Yuga, like we're in this Kali
Yeah.
Yuga and we're
Yeah.
going through it all, but they're going to hurry up through that and get to the promised land or something to that effect. And the best way to do it is through chaos. And
Chaos. Yes.
I mean, and it might be, it seems to be kind of working, but that's, I think it's another foolish thing to think that you're ever going to be able to capture that chaos once that genie's out of the
Yeah.
bottle. But that's the
Yeah.
hubris of the people in these parasitic classes.
Very hybridic, and the idea is that and dropping names, it's like Steve Bannon, right? So like
Yeah.
characters, he's the ultimate chaos magician right now.
Yes.
And interesting enough, so a lot of their work comes from a not chaos magician, a very formal Renaissance mage called John Dee.
Yeah.
And so right. And so John Dee's work was brilliant no matter what he was doing with his Enochian tablets and trying to tap into the angels and his work with Edward Kelly. But due to his being so integrated into Catholicism and then that Protestant Reformation at that time frame we are, and I don't know who said this or if I read this about you or there's a lot of people, we've taken a lot of information,
Yeah.
but it's that we are living in the apocalypse, in the end times. And that's just a worldview that's been wrapped into our consciousness that it's actually not like that. And it doesn't have to be that way. But because of the accelerationists and how all of our media is all around us, they're trying to ramp us into the revelation.
I agree. That's exactly what
Right?
it is. Yeah, for sure. And this is a stated goal from a lot of these people. And what's
Yes.
interesting is when you start to dig into those Epstein files and you start to see some of the back and forths, or if you watch the interview with Steve Bannon and Epstein, it's very telling. And if you read the emails leading up to that interview where they're planning this sort of thing, and my read on that, given what I know about the people involved and some of the individuals that are adjacent to them that I know, and their use of chaos magic in this whole thing, because some people are like, wow, Steve Bannon was really like hitting those hard questions. And other people are like, oh, he was just a buddy with him. And if you look in the emails, he's like, hardy har har, buddy. But then at the same time, not. My read on that is that these are two figures that thought they were using each other. And they were like a titan against a titan. And Bannon has this way intentionally of looking like sloppy Steve. That's his superpower. People just go, when I say to people, you should look into Steve Bannon. And this is apolitical. This has nothing to do with right or left or that's a false paradigm. This is
Yes.
false paradigm. Just look into Steve Bannon and what he's all about. And people will just either go, well, it's just Steve Bannon, or no, that just guy's a dope. And it's like, oh, he's winning because that's what he wanted. And if you know his background, he's extraordinarily intelligent and educated and a huge occultist. And he takes these things very seriously. Was very much guided by his early readings of Evola. And,
Yes.
So
yes, the Hermetic Traditions, great book, by the way.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And so his interpretations of these things get a little different. And he's a different actor in all of this. So in my view, he thought that he was really doing something here with Epstein. And he was playing the fool because he does that. And Epstein was buying it, but only insofar as Epstein also was able to play other people. So I think what you see with this weird dance that they have is this, like, they're trying to out screw each other over. And it's okay because they're kind of having the same goal. Even if it's not explicit, they both were kind of going after similar things. And they both joke too about how, like, oh, I'm the devil. No, you're Lucifer and all of this. And so, but it was very hardy har. And so I think that there was probably a great respect that they had for each other. And I think that it wasn't that Bannon was just simply trying to clear Epstein's name. And I don't think Epstein was just like really great with Bannon and trying to tell him, yeah, we need to have a populist movement. I think it was just two definitely members of intelligence trying to maybe double agent or one up or get intel or just, fighting each other that way. And so, and then people could say, well, what side is he on? And this is where it gets really tricky, because you're assuming there's sides. You're assuming it's always this left-right thing. Well, then was Epstein a Republican or O'Bannon?
Right.
No, we're beyond that. We've been beyond that for a long time. That is not how they think. That is what they give us, but totally. And it's like basically whether it's a soap opera or WWE, that's what we're doing. We're participating in that system, when really what they're doing is something completely different. They're onto different philosophical and intellectual traditions. They are trying new ways of governance and different things that we don't even discuss in a generic sense. And so that's why some of these figures can seem like, well, this is a right-winger guy, but why is he seemingly liberal? Why is the liberal guy kind of right-wingy? Why is this guy, none of it makes sense? And you have to push it into the narrative so it works. But at the end of the day, it's because they are above that narrative. They're using that narrative against us. And so you have likely bedfellows and people. But once you understand it and you can see beyond that, and you say, you know what, perhaps it's the accelerationism is the agenda, the tool is chaos, then it makes sense why one of these people could be opposed to this idea, yet buddy up with another person who wants this other thing to happen. Because at the end of the day, it's chaos. Chaos is what's going to get us where they think they want to be.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very well said, especially because of they are using chaos, but they're not chaos magicians as such. They are tapped into the old golden thread Hermetic traditions of actual ceremonial magic, and which is very fascinating, because it's chaos magic to me seems like when you're growing up and all of a sudden you can't read ancient text, just like the kids today can't read cursive. It's very similar to that. It's like, I remember the first time I bought the Book of Thoth by Crowley, and I bought Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages. I read both of them because I struggled through it, and I at the same time was going to school for philosophy, so I was reading Aristotle and Plato, and I'm like trying my best. But then you pick up these other books like Peter Carroll's Liber Null or any of the Chaos Magic book, and you're like, oh, this is a lot more digestible because it's in plain terms. And then you realize that, like, for me, it was still a turnoff. And so I was like, for some reason, this seems like elementary school in comparison to whatever these other things are. And so I'm going to try really hard to piece these other things together through time, which then I did. And then I basically wanted to throw Peter Carroll's work away, because I'm all like, your stuff is juvenile in comparison to this high level magical stuff of really trying to alchemize my own leaden self into a higher levels of my own soul. And fascinating enough, that's not enough when you have like so much karma built up, like these Epstein, like Bannon, like Trump, like characters who are playing so many different levels of chess against the world. And that leads us into the transhumanism agenda, right? Is that if you can then live forever, you don't have to face the consequences of your own karma, because when you die, you have to go through, the halls of Osiris and weigh your heart against a feather. And if you don't, you have to swim within the pools of death forever. And so that's kind of where and like in the new age spiritual world, you get a lot of the chaos magic is used by a lot of people who don't want to deal with their own cognitive dissonances and inadequacies. And then they are doing all these other things that I think are leading into the transhumanist agenda, which, of confusing people about even what they look like in the mirror, type of thing, which is fascinating. And I don't care what you do with yourself, but at the same time, if you can't even tie your own shoe, you probably shouldn't be doing magic.
This is true. Yeah. It's like the old, don't play with a Ouija board or don't dabble. I mean, the idea of dabbling, though, is probably good advice. Like, don't pick up some of these like bigger texts if you're not ready for them, because you don't know what you're going to unleash. And it's all fun and games until it's not. And I've personally known people who've been very hurt by this world of the occult and their practices that they've done, because you can get so in it. It can possess you. It's like we don't have ideas have us. And so these are just books of ideas. And so you have to be very careful with the ideas of others.
Yeah, and I think you are actually calling forth and I listened to her a lot, especially with Greg. Tracy Twyman was one of them who, we lost. That was lost in the chaos of dealing with something you wrote about, Baphomet, as well as the Ouija boards, as well as dealing with all kinds of dark people. Yeah.
Yep. It's a dark world. I've been trying to move more towards the light a little bit, just but it's like I can't quit it though. I'm so drawn to, like, my Achilles heel is certainly just like curiosity. That's the thing that's going to get me in the end. I just know it. Not meeting strangers at coffee shops from podcasts and taking tinctures. Not that at all.
Not that at all. Yeah, it's very true. It's fascinating. But it's interesting because I think you guys said when you were talking with Greg about how, I don't remember if it was you or who it was, but studying with Jacques Vallée, who's the cutting edge of not only aliens and, extraterrestrials, ultra-terrestrials and these things, but he then was like, we're studying now it's time to learn about the Hermetics, right? Is that what I remember listening?
Yeah.
Was that you?
Yeah, might have. I don't know.
Somebody,
I have a
you or Greg story. Or somebody. Yeah,
somebody.
You do. Okay,
yeah, but I do. I have a similar story in that. Well, just that is one of the things that specifically dealing with people in ufology who are dealing with it at a higher level too, not like just the typical MUFON investigator or something, and no shade to them, but people who are putting money to this and like going into areas of government to try to influence legislation and things for disclosure. So those individuals are very much interested in Hermeticism in relation to the UFO question. Now, that's different than this disclosure thing, which I personally believe is just not real. I think it's fake disclosure 100%. And I think that the whole thing that we're dealing with that is not that there's not aliens or life elsewhere, but that what you're looking at here is a government that is too big and too wealthy and doing too many secret things. And at some level, due to different wording of legislation and their funding, some of them have had a coup where they have said, you know what, we're going to get some of this black budget. And we're going to do it by enhancing the, threat, of course, because this isn't, when they talk about this question, they're not talking about the question of like, how cool is it there could be extraterrestrial life? What could this mean for us? Yada, yada. It's about there's a threat and we're going to need more money to make sure that we protect ourselves. So at the end of the day, forget what it's about. They're there because they want to say we need money in the defense budget for this. And we need a lot of money too. So when you have these whistleblowers and you have these people who are legitimate, they're legitimately part of government, they're legitimately part of academia, they're legitimate people, and they give that legitimacy over and say, look, we're saying that this is a threat, an extraterrestrial threat. Most people are looking at it like, wow, see, they're part of it. And it's like they're disclosing it. They're not disclosing it. They are saying outwardly, hey, government, the other people that we're, kind of against, we want some of that money. We're going to go talk and we're going to get some of that money. And you can't go against us because in doing so, you're going to have to tell things you don't want to tell. So they kind of have them. And so it's like extortion. And so what they're doing, in my view, is they are extorting the government in order to siphon off some of those big dollars to say this is for, defense budget, et cetera. They want wealth transfer from one faction of the same thing to the other. So again, we're having this left-right paradigm, so to speak, maybe not political, but just situational in the struggle for money and power. And so they're not disclosing, they're just saying, hey, because look at what's really come out of it anyway. Nothing, really nothing. And it's just more of a push, like the propaganda to say, look, we're going to need more money. We're going to need to protect everybody from the impending, thing that's coming into the atmosphere. We're going to need more. Whether or not we do need to spend more money and time trying to understand what's out there and maybe to protect us against some sort of impending threat, they've not worried about it. Like that's just been an issue that astronomers have talked about for years, and they've not bothered to put any money towards it, really, not anything meaningful. But now all of a sudden, when it's wrapped in this disclosure idea of potentially an alien threat, now we're going to get public support. We're on the public stage. We're doing all this. We're battling out in public because what we're trying to do is say, oh, look, you know, what say you? And then it puts that part of the government in a position where those individuals are now up against a wall and saying, well, if we even have to go through some sort of litigation, it would come out in discovery, or like, how, what are we going to have to do? So I think that's why it's a strange, again, like a Bannon Epstein dance, like a Titan against a Titan, that what we're watching is just a show put on for us so that we give public support to the usurpers, thinking they're on our side. They're not doing things for us. This is what people do in revolutions. They say we're going to be on the side of the people and off with their heads. And then they take the place of the totalitarian. And then you're just, always the pawns. So likewise in this disclosure, they've garnered public support and we're all like, yeah, that's right, disclose it all and public support. And it's just we're doing is not getting any closer to disclosure or anything for us. We're just helping these people try to get more money, because at the end of the day, it's always about what they can take from us. And so I'm out.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah. No, I agree. No, I agree with that. And it seems like we've already had disclosure. It's already happened. And I think it's already happened in so many ways that the consciousness, we don't understand consciousness. I think the closest way we understand consciousness through both contemporary religious thinking, magical practices, and getting truly into what is our history, like you're doing with your books. And like Obama just came out the other day and said aliens are real, right? And and then tried to cover up saying, well, I was just on the hot seat answering a question. And then Trump came out today saying how he's pissed off at Obama because he wasn't supposed to say those things. And now he can just release the disclosure whenever he wants.
Yeah.
And so it's a really fascinating game that we're playing here, that not you and I, but that's being played on us. And it's fascinating because it's as easy as going into people like you and your work to say, well, actually, I think our history is not what we've been telling you. And this is why. And then letting people figure it out, instead of Steven Spielberg coming out with a movie this summer called Disclosure.
Right. How timely.
How timely.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating. And then things like in the Epstein files, I think I brought this up before, is how they were looking for, wasn't Hillary Clinton looking for Gilgamesh's tomb?
Yeah, I think that came out in WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks, there it is. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, all these Epstein things are really making everyone go back to those WikiLeaks and take a second look. Like, oh, yeah. So some of us old school, foil hat wearers are feeling vindicated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And so it's a really interesting world we live into when we can start to understand that. And this is what I keep trying to tell people, is that first it's consciousness and everything from then, because of what the magicians of old and the mystics have been trying to explain, is that the imagination, the phantasmagoria, that is what bridges the gap to that ultra-terrestrial thing that you're bringing up in your book, is that if we can fine-tune the nervous system, do these practices, and they don't have to be baby eating, sacrificing, human trafficking, right? They are as simple as sitting on your pillow and breathing in a certain way and having this experience, and then going into it. And then hopefully you've protected yourself enough by fine-tuning and doing these will-like practices where you don't have to experience the reptilian brain or the reptiles or whatever that is that we've had. I've had my own trickster-like experiences and my own meditations and DMT experiences. And it's fascinating because then I think I brought this up before when we were on the Occult Rejects, is that it's like the Entheogens have unleashed such great things like Watson and Crick discovering the DNA-like spirals, right?
Right.
And things like the cults of Pythagoras and the Orphic mysteries. They figured out the harmony of the spheres. There are beautiful things, the experience of God, the burning bush, and it doesn't and I think to me it's like a psyop to make people again not witness the beauty of the magical experience. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, that's what's happening with religions more broadly. I mean, that's what's happened to church. You have this. Look at the beautiful cathedrals and places that were built with magic and math, and everything was just meaningful. And you'd go in there, and it would lift you up, and the sounds, everything was made to give you this experience or lift you up somehow. it was mystical. You did things out of the mystery of faith. There's many religions have this, of course, too, where there's like Sufism. It doesn't even matter. It's that what happened was we had this mystical experience, and then over time that's been taken out, and it's become like more ethically based systems of just like, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, and you should do these rituals just because it's tradition, go through the motions. And that's why so many people if they grew up going to church, they just kind of go in there and they're like, this is a snooze fest. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because my mom made me. Like, who cares?
Right.
And
Yeah,
there's nothing from
exactly.
it. And so a lot of people, though, are kind of going back to different religions now. I think it was the Orthodox Church has seen like the biggest influx of people they have in a while. And what's
Yeah.
notable about that is what Orthodoxy has over other Christian faiths is that it is highly mystical. And so people are going there for the mystical experience. And so just like the children yearn for the mines, we are yearning for the mystical, and we go into these empty
Oh, yeah.
shells of like institutions that are also being torn down all the time.
Huh.
Because they just can't fill them. I've seen empty churches all over the place. So, but it's the mystical experience that people are looking for, and they've taken it out of many of these like structures and systems. And I do believe that's by design, because they were been
Yeah.
doing that since the beginning. And that's what the Gnostics kind of talked about, is like, hey, you don't need all this. It's just within here. And if
Mm-hmm.
people look into the Gnostic sayings of Jesus and look at that, they'll see that too. A lot of people, prophets and otherwise, have come and usually stir up a lot of social problems because their message is quite clear. It's, you don't need all this. This is a psyop. This is, like Philip K. Dick style. This is,
Yes, exactly.
this is the structure. This is the, makings of the Anunnaki. This is civilization. This is something else. This is a trap. This is not reality. The reality is what you find when you go within. And that's what they don't want us to know, because we would be all empowered. Imagine if
Yeah.
we just checked out of all of this and we looked inside. We would know the truth then. We would just know. We
Yes.
would know, and then we wouldn't
Yes.
be blinded. But right now, what's going on is we've just been given all the soma that we could have between, algorithms here and high fructose corn syrup there, and just alpha waves and just everything. Even the damn light bulbs now are like a problem
Uh-huh.
with the blue lights,
Uh-huh.
and everything is out just to
To kill
blunt
us.
us. Yes, a
Yeah.
slow kill, because they
It
still
is.
need our energy
Yeah.
in the system.
Frogs in a boiling pot,
Yes,
right?
100%. And so that's
Yeah.
what they're doing, and we don't have to do that. We have to check out of that, and we have to reclaim what it is to be a human being. And we have to get back in touch with the mystical side of things and not just the material side of things. And it's very basic. We need to go outside and touch some grass. We need to be in nature. We need to have quiet. We need to ground ourselves to the Schumann resonance. We need to have that. We need to close our eyes. We need to meditate. We need that first before we go seeking an institution to reinforce that, like a church or whatever. Some people
Mm-hmm.
find that in church, and that's fine. But the reality is, we can't go outside of ourselves looking for what is inside us. And
Yeah.
so when we do that, I mean, boy, there's going to be somebody there to give us the answer, right? You need this food, you need this, drug, you need this, whatever it is. There's always a solution out there, but notice it doesn't work. Notice it's just pleasure traps or a hedonic treadmill. It's never actual happiness. And that's we're seeking pleasures and not happiness. And it's like we need the suffering we talk about the hero's journey. I always have to say this because this is I believe this when we're talking about like what people should do. And I'm just going to preach now and tell you this is what you should do. Go touch grass. But also, hero's
Yeah.
journey, Joseph Campbell said,
Oh yeah.
follow
It's
your
huge.
bliss.
There
And
you
I'm
go.
like, don't follow your bliss. No, Joseph Campbell. Like, I love Joseph Campbell,
Yeah.
but follow your passion, because
Yeah.
passion means pain. It means suffering. And it's like, why would I want to follow my suffering? It's because that's where you find meaning, not useless suffering, because the world, that is an inevitable thing. We're never going to have a utopia where nobody's suffering. We're just not in that system. So it's not about that. It's about the transmutation of that suffering, taking it and making it something golden. And so when we can follow our passion, whatever it is that we're drawn to, that we deem individually is worth suffering for, because that suffering has meaning, we're going to just, it's crazy how your life can change. You just have to push through. But so many people don't want to lean into suffering. They want everything so comfortable.
Be easy.
Even just the clothes we're wearing. I'm wearing a sweatshirt, but I'm like NASCAR, I'm sponsored. So, but like for real, but the thing is, like, people are out there wearing like their pajamas and Crocs and this, that, and the other. And it's like, we're getting way too comfortable. Everyone's getting too comfortable. And it's just like, that's a problem. Nobody wants to push to the limit, see what they're capable of, and expand themselves to new things. And so the avoidance of suffering is just foolish, because you can't avoid suffering. It's just part of life. And the Buddhists know this very well, that suffering is just what we have. But I think in the maybe Western tradition, when it comes to like the hero's journey and the monomyth, we can take that idea of like the perpetual suffering, and instead of just saying, well, there it is, we can say, no, we're going to take action, and we're going to transmute that suffering into something grand and meaningful and inspirational, and we'll become the heroes. We'll get Kleos. And then when we're gone, our memory, our art, our things will outlive us, and we'll live forever. We'll have immortality because of that, and we will be mythologized. So we have to get out there, and we have to do something for our legacy. And that's, I think, what it's all about. That's how we can live forever. It's our spirit. Put your spirit out into this world.
That's exactly it. No, I think you nailed it. And because the term that I learned from Joseph Campbell was Mahasukha, all is suffering in imperfect harmony, right?
Yes.
And I think that's quite beautiful. And it's also the same thing that the Knights of the Holy Grail, which is the monomyth itself, were trying to do, let alone find their own inner feminine externally, or whatever that Holy Grail, that great cup is. It's the idea of they had to suffer to go, you have to go slay the great dragon.
Yes.
And upon slaying the dragon, you got to then gain whatever those treasures are the dragon was hoarding. And the number one treasure high up in the tower is that anima. And upon that sacred marriage, we can then become whole, that whole androgynous being in that symbolic, metaphorical sense, not the transhumanist sense, which seems to always get inverted, where it's all like, well, I can be both. And it's all like, no, you're supposed to find your feminine. You're not supposed to then become the feminine if you're the masculine.
That's just the worship of the material again. They're not worried about the, the spiritual elements of that, transformation. They're trying to just work it out in the physical sense. And it's just like, it's an imperfect replica. It's what happens when you have an iteration on an iteration. It's just like what the demiurge essentially was, it's like, it's further from the source. And so it's imperfect, it's corrupt by design. And so, we just, it's nope, reject that, go to the spiritual, understand all of these things through that mythological and spiritual lens, that metaphysical lens, and then you'll be open to a whole lot of other things. But the hero's journey, I feel like that is just probably one of the most, I really do think that, I know, I really think that that's everything. And when you have the horde, right? Something that I always was, because I used to teach a class on this, so I was like always trying to tell people this part of it too, because it's so easy to go, okay, we got the gold, woo. But oftentimes what will happen is if you stop there, you still have a route to go. I mean, that's like 10 o'clock, you got midnight, you got to complete that cycle. What's the next thing that you have to go back to the Shire? You have to go back with the boon. You have to go back. So if you stay though, at like say 10 o'clock, you have the riches, you have everything, you can become one of those tyrannical individuals who made it to the top, they're hoarding all the things, and then they become, the inverse of what they were doing. And so the next step is you have to go back with all of that and give of yourself. And you have to say, okay, this is what I found. This is how I'm benefiting society with it, whatever. And you go back to where you started. It's the humility again. You don't stay in, the promised land and Narnia. You don't stay in all these like different places. You have to go back and you have to do that. But then you're welcomed as the hero. You're forever changed.
And then you do it again. And then you do it again.
Yes.
And then you do it again, because you have become now the mentor for somebody. Yes. You are the magical being for somebody else.
Yeah. We're all part of these stories.
Yeah. And before I interrupted you, said, and then you are changed. And I got so excited. So I was all like, yes. But then it's the same as what you were just on, Miguel, I saw. And it's like his whole thing with saying, write your own gospel, find your own myth.
Love that.
And it's so true. And even when I interviewed him not too long ago, and he said it, and I was all like, I've been listening to you say that forever, and now you just said it on my stream, and it's so awesome because it hits so close to home that we've forgotten that's exactly what we were supposed to do. Is you're not just supposed to be one of the hordes that Jesus spoke to, nor are you supposed to be one of the apostles, which is part of our path. You are actually supposed to be the Christos.
Yes.
You are the sons and daughters of God. And I think then that's something that the more like a lot of people get confused, even though there's an influx in Orthodoxy and in Catholicism right now. You get people out there, and I used to listen to Jay Dyer a lot, but I'm now quite sick of his rhetoric because
slanted.
He blocked me on X because I was asking questions.
Really?
And he seems to do that. And I was just like, oh, you're going to hate on Candace for Project Looking Glass when you've been on fucking Sam Tripoli's Tinfoil Hot podcast as one of the greats. And now you're like, because of your part of Alex Jones's honeypot, you're going to now like not like, you're not going to allow other people to talk and ask questions. Cause I wasn't somebody who was pushing. I was just like, bro, what are you doing? Like, I used to like you, even though I can't really stand the whole all occultism is bad. He had his own bad LSD experience, so now he's going to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And he's a young earth creationist also. I don't quite get that. And so there are these things that
different. Okay.
And
I
so
didn't know that.
there are these things that I get confused about. And so it's like the Alex Jones thing where I'm all like, was Bill Cooper right in stating that Alex Jones himself was somebody who maybe shouldn't be trusted? I don't know. What do you think?
Bill Cooper, man, what a complex guy. I mean, people kind of dogged on him for a while because they said he was this like terrible drunk, and then he was really rude to people and said a bunch of things. I say, give the guy a break, because if you were in that position back then, I mean, I'd be thinking I'd throw a few back too. Maybe get a little upset at people, but like he, I mean, he had a fair criticism for sure about Alex Jones back when he was talking about the in the moment when he was hyping the like year 2000 computer thing, like the Y2K dilemma. And so he had a legitimate concern there. Now, I don't know whether or not that it's like he's controlled opposition specifically back then even. I feel like I don't know. I couldn't say. I do know that some of those characters like that are just such characters and so kind of into the fame that whether they're like, how much would it take for him to be controlled opposition? Like, is it just a steak dinner? Is it like a nice time? Is it some flattery? That kind of thing. So like, how deep did it even go that deep? So like, it's hard to say. I will say I was always suspicious though when, I don't know how long you had been listening to him or anything, but there was a time where his shows were often a little humorous and a lot of tinfoil hat stuff, a little politics, of course, geopolitics, Bilderberg, whatever. And then he went through a period where I want to say it was right before the elections of like I think this was like around 2014. Like, don't quote me on that. Around that time, he did a thing called a money bomb. And he did this, he hyped this. He'd never done anything like this. And he had this whole thing on a show where he was like, it's a money bomb. Send me all this money and the frogs are going to be heterosexual again. And like, you just got to send me the money. And it's like, what's going on? And he had like, it was like a St. Jude's telethon thing. There was like a thermometer and all this. I'm like, he's raising all this money. Fine. He has to raise money, I suppose, although it's not a nonprofit, whatever. Like, that's how he's doing it. But I did notice too that money bomb must have gone off, because after that he had a huge new set and all kinds of new stuff and money and whatever. And I just thought, now once that happened, I mean, and maybe it was a success, capitalism. But when that happened, then we had the elections come up. Like, that was when we started this whole campaigning thing, and his whole content went really deep into just politics, like run of the mill politics. deep dives on like, like the Bannon stuff, War Room and all whatever. And it became
Yeah, yeah,
very patriot. Now, some younger people may have, started watching him and thought it's just how he always was, is this like right winger or whatever. He started out against George Bush and like
yeah.
he was all about like some really good stuff. And then
He was.
he then like, he did the Bohemian Grove stuff. I mean, like it was always political, geopolitical, but then after this money bomb, he like went and his content really shifted. And so what is that? That's the one
Yeah.
thing that to me would be the red flag to say, did he really just have this organic like outcome of all his like fans just giving him a big bomb of money to buy an expensive studio? I mean, like I just bought a new Sony for this studio and it's pricey. I'm just one person. I don't have any money bombs. I mean, if you want to send me your money in a money bomb, I won't say no, but I'm just saying like I don't have any like money to do this. It was expensive. And I'm thinking he goes from like having some money to like CNN level production all of a sudden. And I'm just like, I don't know. And then with that, the content changed. So I'm like, that's a little sus to me, as the kids would say. And then, so you have that guy, Bill Cooper. I think Bill Cooper at the end, though, was getting real paranoid and sort of everybody's bad. But at the same time, everybody kind of was, right? Like,
yeah.
And
so bad that they took out a chapter of his book.
Yeah. And they took out a chapter of his life.
Yeah,
like
it's
done.
got bad enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was an interesting figure. There were a lot of figures back then that were wild and interesting. And I think like many things, the circuit was infiltrated by COINTELPRO, and a lot of people started going in there. And because, I mean, I don't know. I've been interested in this stuff for quite a long time, and I want to just think that everyone's waking up and they're just interested too, and we're all just going to be like weird, kids in summer vacation buying those like crazy books or having fun, like we're unicorns. But I just feel that some of this is artificial. That some of this like media about like anything odd, anything out of the ordinary. I just feel like there's something more to it, almost like it has been overall controlled opposition, like the whole thing, like the cultural creatives have like guided us in this sense of, I don't know if it's like to prepare us for some sort of like Project Bluebeam, or if it's to just totally like break us down as a people so that we feel that there's no trust in institutions ever again possible. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Both. But could be that, could be all of
usually
that.
Both. I think it's all of it.
It was just be chaos again. So they just want us to
be
chaotic.
And that's exactly what it is. Chaos, because then it leads back to the same thing that happens as civilization started. It's that there is something crazy happening with our planet, it seems. Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson have been talking about it a lot lately. And the cyclical nature of solar minimums and solar maximums, and where we're moving on the highways of the solar system with these meteors coming down and hitting the planets, and just there's a lot of crazy shit going on. And it seems to me that everyone, not these parasitic classes, are preparing us for something. And fascinating enough, I have a theory that actually it's that that consciousness can be stopped, kind of like a time loop, that we're actually in a time loop right now that is like halting progression in such a way until they completely have a kind of control over things. And this is just a theory / anime video game kind of idea, but it's that they've tapped into some global consciousness, and that they're trying to keep us in this same looped system over and over again. So it feels like, life is nothing but scientific materialism, as they harvest energy from people through the blue light and the screens, until finally they've created their own breakaway civilization well enough that, like Catherine Austin Fitz has been talking about, with this, how much money has been missing for a long time, where is it going? And as that happens, slowly they're letting their grips loose on that consciousness control grid. That is why we're seeing so much chaos happen, because you can't control billions of people, no matter if it's the 7 billion like they're telling us, or just a few billion, So as everyone is now, as reality is bending in on itself, as people like yourself are tapping into such things and creating books and writing, and now the globalization of the world, which I don't think is 100% bad. And the only reason I say that is because it has to be not 100% bad because it's happening no matter what.
Right.
And just
It's
like the
been happening too.
Hellenization, it's been happening, and the Hellenization of the world happened, and that was great for the diaspora and the syncretism and all the magical texts being in one area. And now the problem is we just got to make sure that we still keep books around, because if everything now goes on the internet and AI now starts to take over things, that's how that Orwellian system of double think and double speak happens, where you can just change things at a dime and then history can be revised, just like the history that you've been trying to tell us that maybe isn't exactly the way we think it is.
That was part of my dissertation work, actually, was discussing the necessity for there to be actual artifacts in museums, which you'd think, well, okay, you need a dissertation on that? Yes, because they don't want those in there. Everything became gamification. They wanted to gamify the entire museum experience in the name of education, saying that young people in particular would learn better this way. Older people would be more engaged with it. I specialized in not pedagogy, but andragogy, which is like how adults learn. And so I was looking into like the adult experience. So the difference between how kids learn and adults, children learn through like rote memorization. They're just a sponge. Their whole like MO is just like take in the information. And you can reward them, say, do your times tables and here's a little cookie. And that's great for them. They have extrinsic motivation. But at about 15, 16, you start going, why do I have to go to school? He's like, why? I want to know why.
Yeah.
What's in it for me? You start to be more intrinsically motivated. That's the onset of that adulthood. And as you push more into adulthood, it takes a lot more to get you have to be like, all right, you're going to hit your numbers this, quarter. You're going to get a big bonus check. All right. We have levels of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. But when it comes to just learning on a casual level, like going to a museum, adults have to want to do it and they have to be drawn to it and they have some meaning there for it. And they then, when they're face to face with an artifact, there has to be some connection that's made. It's metaphysical. It's not practical. It's not about the thing itself. It's about all of the other things. Well, what they've been trying to do is just take all of that experience out and replace it with touch screens and everything. And they say that this is better for learning and engagement. It's absolutely not. Scientifically speaking, it's not good cognitively or enjoyment-wise or self-reporting or anything like that. It is not good, but yet they keep replacing and replacing and replacing and taking those artifacts, putting them somewhere else. And in fact, in some cases, they're destroying them. They will digitize documents and then destroy the originals. I just got done dealing with this in the museum that I have been dealing with, and it is a disaster where the level of just disregard for actual things because we can just digitize it should scare everybody, because a lot of the museums are just saying, we don't need this. We've scanned it. We don't need this. Because it takes money to house and preserve. And you could say, well, it can't take that much, right? Well, it kind of does, but they also have to justify it in the numbers because they have boards. They have, museums are nonprofits, generally speaking. And even if they're not, there's still a board or somebody to answer to. And if that's even worse because they want growth. But either way, you're not just there saying, I'm a museum director and I can say, oh, I think this is important to humanity. I'm going to safeguard this forever. It's like, no, you don't make that decision. There has to be a board. It has to fall under the Attorney General, all of this governmental involvement. And so at the end of the day, they don't want to vote on budgets to increase to be able to properly house documents. And they say, well, we're just going to pick which ones are necessary and which ones are. And now that we can digitize it, we get a bunch of money from a grant to say, digitize it all, put it up there, make it accessible to people by putting it through a software system and cataloging it. And then what do we do with the rest? We could either discard it through deaccessioning, or we can make money off of it by selling it to people in the private market. And that's always a good idea for museums.
That's crazy.
So what we're having now is this terrible, terrible situation where artifacts aren't safe in museums, and period. Just they're not where they go.
Wow.
So when you have like Indiana Jones, like it belongs in a museum, it's like probably not, maybe not.
No, it doesn't.
And an argument too that we have made in the West to say, well, the Iraqis, they're the war torn. It's probably a better idea if we hold on to the artifacts for safekeeping. Yeah. We'll give it back to you.
It's the jihadis' fault.
It's everybody. Yeah, it's not, So you get all this, and then you have these artifacts in the museums, And they're saying, well, it's going to be safer here. Nothing is safe. All of these things are at risk, and it's always been that way, but it's just getting worse now that we've introduced this like false security of the digital world. And so get books, hold on to real books. Exactly. Not everything is online. Even if it is, it can be digitally altered. Get books, get artifact, get things, hold on to things, and hold on to what matters. Be human.
Yeah, exactly. Be human. Nice. No, I love that. So my final question is going to be, so I think there is something that is really important that is going on, and I think you're hitting on it, and it's that has to do with Campbell's hero's journey integrating with the mythology that you've tapped into. And so what you do is you're taking something that seems really abstract in the mythological realms, and you're making it very concrete and saying that there is something, it is real, and not only are we finding it now, but the Sumerians and the Mesopotamians and these ancient cultures all the way up to the bloodline families and the parasitic class know these things as well. What would be, for those who haven't read or have now read your book, what is one of your takeaways from that book that you would want somebody to know for sure? Maybe they didn't get it while they read it.
That's a great question. So what the main takeaway, I think, for this book, it's called Anunnaki Revelation. And so in it, I wanted to reveal something that would be a little bit different. It was sort of a play too on the revelatory nature of this whole discovery, that it wasn't something purely archaeological, that it wasn't that we found a new artifact, although there are artifacts in the book, but it wasn't that there was this new artifact and therefore, etc., but rather there are these new ways of understanding these Anunnaki, these Apkallu, these ancient gods all together. And those new ways are revealed truths. They're things that we can sort of know by looking deep within us too, and our own experiences. And so rather than offloading the responsibility of understanding these things onto, say, Zechariah Sitchin, Michael Heiser, or even me, you would want to look inward. We all kind of read some of these things and think, I think there's more to the story than that. I would just push anyone into, they always say, do your own research. That's valid. I mean, that can get a little, if your idea of research is just simply like on Rumble, like at 3 a.m. on like, conspiracy videos, I mean, that's fun, but it's not research. So, sorry. But rather than just say, do your own research, I would say, do your own thinking, feeling, inward self-reflection. Listen to that still small voice. And when somebody is telling you like the aliens built the pyramids, do you feel that way? Listen, when somebody's like, no, actually these ancient people, they did everything this easy way and this is wrapped up, like a whole Flint Dibble approach to it. Like, I mean, does that sit well with you? Maybe it does. I mean, don't just get wowed by the veneer of people's names or the books they've put out or the shows they've been on or any of that. Listen and then check in with yourself. Okay, research whatever, but also remember that immaterial sense. So look out there, do the research, but then close that up and sit with it for a while and say, this doesn't sound right, or maybe it's a little bit here and a little bit there, or there's an amalgamation. And then allow yourself, if you're so inclined, to lean into that curiosity and imagination and say, what if this, and think differently, because it's okay to be creative. In fact, it's important to be creative when you're doing a scientific inquiry. We've been told so long that there's just no room for creativity, that it's just quantified metrics and like a meta-analysis and etc. But that's not how real things are discovered. Real discoveries, when you look at the past, have been done by people who were just like, high or meditating or sitting under an apple tree and, whatever. It's look at Newton. He's writing, like the father of science, right? And then he is writing about like all kinds of crazy occult stuff. So that fringe, playing on the periphery, You have chaos and you have order, and you have to balance those two things. Chaos is necessary, order is definitely necessary. But if you have all order and no chaos, then there's just no innovation. You're just now in a repeating pattern in a jail. Likewise, if you have all chaos, you're just floating in a sea of possibility where nothing actually manifests or materializes. So the best place to be, in my view, is to be right at the edge, play on the periphery, play on the fringe, so to speak. Take that creativity, run it through the filter of scientific materialism, and use both. Use a mixed methods approach. And what that looks like in a real sense is read everything, hear everybody out, and then walk away and sit with it and check in with your gut and say, and then allow yourself that freedom to explore, have your own ideas, and then follow those threads. And before you know it, well, you may be on to a whole new theory and maybe even write a book about it. I don't know. But that's what we need, are more people who are able to consolidate that research and kind of put a little more of that qualitative approach to it and creative approach to it. And you know what? You're going to get it wrong too. You have to be not risk averse. You have to be able to say, you know what? I blew it. That was a dumb idea. Well, live and learn. But so many people in these fields are unwilling to take those risks because their career rides on it. So they're careerists and they want to maintain their position. And that's just simply impossible. That's what academic was like, freedom was initially for, was that if you got yourself in a tenured position, you could push the envelope, do things that were a little bit like weird and not get fired for it. Well, now it's just a cush job if you even have tenure. Nowadays, that's not even a thing so much anymore. So the whole point is lost because people get in those positions and they just want to sit there and do nothing. So that's what we have to stop. We have to be able to say, as a society too, if somebody comes out with a theory, say Sitchin, right? Or he's dead, so I shouldn't probably put him as an example, but let's just say Sitchin, and maybe he was wrong. Maybe he was wrong about some stuff. It's okay. He should, if he were alive to defend himself, he should be able to go, now with the new information we have, maybe we didn't go to that. They weren't the Anunnaki on spaceships from the 1960s, like Flash Gordon stuff or whatever he was influenced by all that like old sci-fi stuff. Maybe it's not that, and that's okay. And so Eric von Daniken, who just passed recently, he is like also one of these figures where he just like got looped in, and he has his ancient astronaut theory and chariots of the gods and all that. What I will say is, having not really gotten involved in his work, like post Chariots of the Gods, he wrote a big endorsement for my Anunnaki connection. And he told the publisher, he really liked the book and the direction. He agreed with a lot of things, and he wanted to send me a bunch of books that I might be interested in that he wrote. And I was like, I guess I didn't even realize he wrote a bunch more books. Okay. And so I got these books and I start looking at them, and I was actually shocked because I'm not going to say he walked his theory back, but he was definitely more like open and evolved in his thinking than Chariots of the Gods or what other people would have dismissed him to be. And I thought, well, I wouldn't have known that because I never bothered to read the rest of his work. I just kind of pigeonholed him as, ancient astronaut theorist guy. That was it. But he did a little more than that. And so that's another thing I would say is, when you're looking into these people and looking into these theories, just they could be wrong. That's fine. If you're a person who's putting out theories, it's okay to take risks. Just take the L and move on and say, look, I thought, but I was wrong. But that's how we learn together. We're supposed to remember that we're all in this together. It's an empirical thing. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we're all trying to get somewhere together and not against each other. It does take arguments to, get there. You have to be able to like put forth a thesis and antithesis, etc. But we shouldn't make that then the whole focus is just like he owned that person or that. It's like, well, no, the goal is a synthesis, but of the right things so that we progress to wherever it is we think we might be progressing or going. I don't know, but I'm here for the ride.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And the idea of that synthesis is an alchemical process of making sure that when you're going through it, that you're letting go of all the stuff that doesn't serve us through that process. And so we can then take those things as cornerstones to build ourselves up to whatever it is we're going. And hopefully it is towards the divine, towards whatever it is that is before us, because it's going to be a fun ride no matter what.
Yeah, we're not in control. Like that's we just got to give up. We're not in control.
Yes.
Just let go, and let's just all hold on to each other's hands, not fight.
Yeah.
Just like go for the ride and see what happens. But yeah, I hope people when they read the book, they understand that it's just part of an ongoing inquiry, and hopefully it answers some things, but then also gives people more things to like contemplate, because I want to keep the discussion going. I don't want it to just end with like Sitchin and the Anunnaki, or like, you know, enter to win the sweepstake for a Rolls Royce or whatever. Like, how does that, like, I'm not naming names, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
no,
like, what? How does that even work? Whatever. So like, just somewhere not there. We just need to kind of look at it differently. But I get contacted a lot by readers and people, and they are very I very happy to explore new ideas, and I get that a lot. And so I have faith in thinking that, you know, there's more people out there that are interested in stuff rather than just like the old ideas. And so it's not as bleak as it may have seemed in the beginning part of this, at least for me, because it was all just nothing but like Sitchin and Stargates, and now it's like, Stargates? What's that? Sitchin? But we got other things now. We got bloodlines. We got like DMT. We got archives. We got everything. We got mushroom tablets and all of that. I even talk about Epstein in this book too, because it's relevant, believe it or not. Like everything. I haven't
got to that part yet.
Yeah. Well, because I talk about the publishing dilemma, the crisis in publishing in academia, and Robert Maxwell, like controlling the knowledge of the textbooks and all of this. And so, you know, I spend a lot of time, or only a decent portion of time in a chapter kind of, and it's going to sound bad. And like, you know, the Flint Dibble types will be like, you pseudo-archaeologist. Well, exactly. This is the method. And what I did is I basically took some time to discredit mainstream archaeology, to say, look, this is why this is wrong. This is why it's wrong. Not to say there's no value in the methodology, but there's no value in worshiping the ivory tower and thinking that this is it and not being able to question stuff, when at the end of the day, Robert Maxwell is writing your textbook. So just don't. Like, I'd rather get my info from Sitchin or something at that point, but no,
of course. I think that's brilliant, because then that is that idea of that tower card as it falls, because that ivory tower is built on a house of cards, so to speak. Yeah, and that's amazing. That's beautiful. I think that we have many brilliant conversations ahead of us, you and I, and in this strange ocean of chaos. I'm so grateful that we got to have this conversation.
Me too.
And I think definitely make sure to spam right now, everyone, with all your sources, as in everything that they can go find, read whatever books. Tell them where they can find you, Dr. Heather Lynn.
Go to drheatherlynn.com. It's drheatherlynn.com. You can find links to everything there. Find me on YouTube too. You can just look for me by name, or look for the Midnight Academy. That's my podcast. And books are at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, everywhere books are sold. I will be speaking at Obscuricon in beautiful Eureka Springs, Arkansas in July 23rd, I believe. So you can go to my website and find the links to buy tickets for that. That should be a lot of fun. So yeah, come see me. I'm doing a workshop showing people how to write in cuneiform. It'll be like a whole demonstration. You'll actually be able to write in cuneiform and have that.
Crazy.
And take it. Yeah. Also doing a discussion on the ultra-terrestrial question, really, like the connection between aliens, demons, and all of these other entities, and what is real and what is not, and the occult aspects of that. So yeah, but find me at my website. That's the best way. But also email me if you have any questions. I love hearing from people. And if you have any tinctures or want to meet up for coffee and slip me some sort of like weird drug. I mean, I don't even have the common sense not to meet people. So no, I'm joking. Kind of. No.
Yeah, kind of. But that's how you stumble down. That's why you're Alice down the rabbit hole here and coming up with amazing things. That's hilarious.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I would love to actually have you on my show too. It's a great conversation. You have so many great things to talk about. And I just love what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that means a lot. Yeah, I would love to come on, as well as have you back on for talking about Plato and talking about more focalized in the hero's journey, whatever books you have coming out in that threshold as well. We definitely have, it's important for people like yourself who are open-mindedness yet still see through the lens of the academic world, because it gives us a ground to work off of, and then to see where maybe we're missing some things. And so I think that's really important. So yeah, again, thank you for coming on to Magus in the Media. And everyone else out there, make sure you like, subscribe, and share, because in this madness of this crazy world, the algorithmic gods, the Anunnaki, the Numa Elish, there are so many things to read, to write, and to arithmetic on. However, Magus in the Media is here for you. We break down myth, magic, and meaning in the worlds and the stories that you and I love. And as long as there are people trying to tell us that none of it is real and that you should just stick to a cubicle and stick to your Cartesian line system and make sure that people like Flint Dibble are telling you who your archaeological finds are about, that means you may be wanting to see the broader horizon. And we're here to find those patterns and to create that community, because this is what we're here for. And so I would like to say thank you, everybody, for listening, and I will see you next time. Good night.